I dug out a dying man from a pile of beggars, tattered, limping, disheveled, crawling on all fours like a dog begging for food, the fool everyone outside the city despised. Only I knew that this man before me was once the most dazzling prodigy of the imperial capital, the radiant young man in splendid attire astride a spirited horse. The first thing I did after being reborn was to go to that dilapidated temple outside the city and pick Gulu up. The rain had just stopped. Water dripped from the corners of the dilapidated temple. A man lay on the ground, his clothes torn, hair disheveled, so filthy his original appearance was unrecognizable. His body was covered in blood, eyes tightly shut, visibly breathing more out than in. Not far away, a group of beggars gathered around a fire, noisily placing bets on when he would breathe his last. A few hard steamed buns lay on the ground. No one cared whether he lived or died, they treated it as mere entertainment. Although Gulu now appears half dead, it was actually their doing. Just a day ago, a group of beggars were panhandling on the street when some bullies harassed a decent woman. They righteously urged Gulu to join them in stopping it, but as soon as he stepped forward, the beggars scattered and fled. Only Gulu was caught and beaten half to death. Those beggars just wanted to trick him into walking to his doom for their own amusement. Gulu lay bloodied and mangled by the roadside for half a day until patrolling Yaman runners, disgusted by his ruination of the neighborhood's image, tossed him outside the city walls. That day, torrential rain poured down as Gulu, barely conscious, mustered his last ounce of strength to drag himself inch by inch back to this dilapidated temple. There, he succumbed to raging fever and grievous wounds, remaining unconscious to this day. Tattered and broken, he lay in a dark, damp corner where rats waited to feast on his corpse, while foul-smelling beggars gathered nearby, watching coldly from the sidelines. None could have imagined that not long ago, he had been the capital's most dazzling prodigy, a radiant young man who once rode proud on spirited steeds. If he hadn't fallen from that great height, he would never have needed to set foot in this remote and barren little town in his entire life, too. Gulu was originally the supremely noble crown prince of the imperial capital. His father was once just an insignificant prince who, with the help of Empress Shi, then the daughter of a great general, ascended the throne to become the ruler of a nation. In her youth, Empress Shi personally took up arms for the emperor, joining her aging father to win military honors for him. The hazards of war left her body injured, and she bore only Gulu as her sole child in this lifetime. The emperor was deeply moved by the empress's kindness and never took any concubines, which became a much-told tale among the people. Gulu was crowned crown prince from childhood. As the emperor's only offspring and the sole heir in the palace, he naturally grew up showered with boundless affection. He proved himself worthy, excelling in both literary and martial arts, flawless in every aspect, and deeply beloved by the people and court officials alike. Even I, living in this remote borderland village, had heard of the flawless crown prince from the imperial city. The young man rode gallantly in vibrant attire, his famed sword gleaming like frost, wherever his horse's hooves trod. Scarlet sleeves would wave from every tower, flowers embroidered on brocade, fire refining oil, a figure surrounded by stars like the moon. Until a few months ago, the emperor discovered the Yi family's plot to rebel. The century-old Yi family was raided and exterminated that night, while the Empress Shi, who had been exclusively favored for over a decade, was confined to the cold palace and later committed suicide by swallowing gold. Crown Prince Gulu was deposed, reduced to commoner status, and exiled thousands of miles away. The world lamented the Grand General's foolishness. His failed rebellion led not only to his execution but also brought disaster upon his daughter and grandson. But I knew the Yi family never intended to rebel. It was merely the emperor's excuse for kicking down the ladder, as the ruler ultimately feared the Yi family's achievements overshadowing his authority. Moreover, he never loved Empress Shi. All those years of exclusive favor were nothing but pretense. He had a childhood sweetheart, kept hidden for over a decade. After consolidating his power both in court and beyond, he finally managed to overthrow the Yi family and openly bring back the woman he truly loved. Shortly after the Yi family's downfall, the emperor brought back a woman and a child, bestowing upon them the titles of noble consort and princein. The capital no longer spoke of the once glorious Shi family, nor of the formerly celebrated crown prince. Noble consort's son had harbored jealousy and hatred for Empress Shi for over a decade. Now that her rival was dead, all that resentment was directed at Gulu. With the emperor's tacit approval, she instructed the escorting officials to give special attention to the criminal exile Gu. Through wind, frost, rain, and snow, no one knew what Gulu had endured. By the time he reached this remote frontier town of Liangqing, the once radiant youth had become a completely different person, with one leg broken, ragged and limping, disheveled and filthy-faced. often forced to crawl on all fours like a dog begging for food without dignity, the fool that everyone despises. Overnight, he fell from being a noble prince to a condemned commoner, with his mother, grandfather, and entire clan perished, becoming a drowning dog that anyone could kick, a devastating enough to crush anyone. No one could have imagined that such a destitute and wretched Gulu would later make a comeback, return to the capital, overthrow the Sun family, force the old emperor to abdicate, and become the new emperor of Zhao. What a pity, he was a tyrant. 3. I stepped over the rotten threshold of the ruined temple, holding a heavy axe in my hand. The moment I entered, the group of beggars turned their gaze in unison. Seeing a lone girl approaching, they burst into malicious laughter. Without even glancing at them, I walked straight to Gulu's side, stepped on a rat's tail, and expressionlessly hacked the rodents to pieces with my axe. Minced flesh splattered everywhere, creating a nauseatingly gory scene. When I lifted my head again and stared blankly at the beggars, the group had already fallen silent, cowering in fear without daring to move. Not a single word was uttered as I dragged Gulu away. I casually tossed a golden hairpin into the corner, dragged Gulu home before the next heavy rain poured down, brewed medicine and forced it down his throat, then wiped the mud stains off his face with a cloth towel. Revealing a delicate face, Gulu was exceptionally handsome, lush yet aloof, beautiful like a celestial being from the heavens. Unfortunately, in the previous life, no one picked Gulu up from that ruined temple. He lay in that corner for 3 days, starving and freezing, with a persistent high fever, severely injured and unconscious. No one came to his rescue. He struggled on the brink of death for 3 long days, during which even starving rats began gnawing at him. Later, through sheer willpower, he miraculously survived, but was left with lasting ailments. His face, exposed beyond his clothes, was gnawed to a bloody pulp, leaving behind pitted scars that looked horrifying. Gulu was a tyrant, true to his name, the cruel and perverted kind. His disfigured face was his most vulnerable spot. If any courtier showed the slightest hint of disgust or fright, he would immediately draw his sword and behead them on the spot, or subject them to cruel punishments. In moments of whimsy, he'd even order public flaying of faces. His tyrannical cruelty and mercurial temper kept the entire court in constant terror. With his inherently vicious nature and demonic appearance, Gulu became known among the people as a child-eating Yama king, a name so fearsome it could silence crying infants at night. Everyone prayed for divine retribution upon this tyrant. Now, in this life, he wouldn't have to live with his life hanging by a thread, nor would he need to be disfigured again. 4. The next day, Gulu remained unconscious. While I was out buying medicine, I overheard the neighbors gossiping. "Hey, have you heard? Today the county magistrate sent a bunch of constables to arrest all those beggars outside the city and throw them in jail. What's going on?" The Wang family's ancestral hairpin went missing and couldn't be found. Yesterday, a beggar was sneaking around trying to pawn it at a pawnshop. The shopkeeper recognized it and reported it to the authorities. Must have been stolen by those beggars. Otherwise, why wouldn't they just return it to the Wangs for a reward? How audacious. The Wang family has great influence. Now that the whole group's been arrested, they're definitely in for a rough time. After finishing their idle chatter, they changed the subject. No one would take a group of beggars seriously. Carrying the medicine package, I pushed the door open and met a pair of dark, profound peach blossom eyes. Gulu looked at me with full vigilance in his eyes. "Who are you?" The axe I had snatched from the woodcutter next door had been subtly repositioned by him, placed within easy reach, the only object in this room that could barely qualify as a weapon. Seeing that I was a girl about his age, he still didn't lower his guard. Gulu used to be like the sun in the sky, dazzling and radiant, warm and approachable in all his dealings. Not like now, when he's all thorns and edges. Instead of answering him, I said, "I saved you. You don't need to be wary of me." The implication is, if I wanted to harm him, I wouldn't have gone through the trouble of saving him. Gulu didn't know whether to believe it or not. "Why did you save me?" Why did I save him? Because, I thought for a while, coming up with a barely passable reason. A long time ago, you gave me a steamed bun, a large, fragrant steamed bun hiding flecks of gold. I gazed at him, noticing a momentary daze in his eyes. 5. He asked who I was. I didn't answer. It's not that I don't want to answer, it's just that I myself don't know how to describe me. I am a Tao, an inconspicuous poor village girl from a small mountain village, living in the most remote mountain valley where even the nearest village takes 2 hours to reach on foot. No one would ever imagine that in the imperial city thousands of miles away, that Chancellor Lu whom people only hear about from storytellers, the great figure second only to the emperor, is my father, my biological father by blood, Lu Qingshi. The villagers only knew that my mother was a madwoman. Actually, my mother wasn't always mad from the beginning. Long ago, my mother was the daughter of a wealthy merchant, spoiled and pampered since childhood, willful, foolish, cruel, capricious, but undeniably beautiful. Lu Qingshi was the son of a servant couple in my mother's household. She disliked him because he was always too clever, making her seem stupid by comparison and causing her parents to scorn her in comparison, so she often bullied him. Lu Qingshi had long harbored resentment. Later, he achieved success in the imperial examinations, took his parents away with him, gradually rose to become the local county magistrate, then found an excuse to raid the wealthy merchant's household where he grew up, executing dozens of people from masters to servants by beheading. The uncles and elders who watched him grow up were executed without hesitation, not even sparing the wealthy merchant couple who had wholeheartedly supported his education. His cruelty and viciousness were evident. For reasons unknown, he spared my mother, secretly imprisoning her in a golden cage to toy with and violate. Overnight, my mother lost both parents, fell from nobility, and was forced by her lifelong enemy until she eventually went mad. After obtaining her, Lu Qingshi gradually grew bored. At that time, my mother was severely insane, often harming herself and others. As he was being promoted to another post, he abandoned her in a remote mountain village to fend for herself. That was the old house where his parents used to live, 2 thatched cottages hidden in a mountain valley, long uninhabited. Before leaving, Lu Qingshi casually gave some money to a local auntie, asking her to occasionally bring food and supplies into the mountains. My mother was deranged, her hair tangled over her face like a female ghost. That auntie didn't want much to do with her either and didn't even notice she was pregnant, until the child was born, left in a corner, whimpering weakly. Only then did the auntie realize in shock that the madwoman before her had actually been pregnant. The auntie saved my life with dog's milk when I was starving and near death. I stumbled through childhood until age 5 before learning to speak. Then timidly asked my closest aunt why I had no name while other children did. I envied them so. My aunt told me to ask mother for one, but I was afraid. Over the years, mother's madness seemed slightly better. She'd have a few gradually normal days each month. The money Lu Qingshi left was long gone. Now we survived by her occasionally embroidering things during lucid moments for aunt to sell in town, exchanging for coarse grains. The young mistress who'd never lifted a finger in her life, no one knew how she learned embroidery. Her hands pricked bloody with needle marks. I'm afraid of my mother. She detests me. I'm the child of her enemy, an unwanted offspring she was forced to bear. When my mother goes mad, she's tried several times to kill me, pushing me into rivers, abandoning me in wolf-infested mountains, hitting my head with stones, or starving me to death, but my vitality is too tenacious. Like a wild weed, I survived being left on the freezing ground all night as a newborn, and later, my mother's repeated attempts to kill me failed, so she gradually gave up. Yet when her madness took over, she would often beat me, whipping me with bamboo strips, scratching me with her nails, pulling my hair, using all sorts of violent means to hurt me as an outlet. Even she herself didn't know what she was doing. She treated herself the same way in those fits. When she was somewhat normal, she wouldn't lay a hand on me, but her attitude was cold. Occasionally, if she was in a good mood, she might even smile at me and tell me stories. During those times, even if her words were always sharp and cold, I couldn't bear to walk away. I just wanted to stay with my mother. A child's natural longing for their mother is innate. My aunt told me to ask my mother for a name, but I didn't dare. Later, she mentioned it to my mother herself, but my mother never responded. Until I was 5 years old, I stood on a stool cooking wild vegetable porridge on the stove, then tripped and broke an earthenware bowl. My mother coldly watched the blood from the scrape on my arm, then just bent down to pick up the broken pottery shards. Later she said, "Since you're so eager for a name, from now on you'll be called Atao. Pottery isn't worth much, just a few coins each. No need to feel heartbroken if it gets broken." 6. On my 10th birthday, my aunt passed away. And no one ever knew that deep in those mountain valleys, a mother and daughter still lived. As a young child, I began taking over my aunt's role, walking dozens of kilometers to town to sell my mother's embroidery, then buying the cheapest grain to bring back, often leaving at dawn and returning home long after dark. Just like that, I kept walking and walking for 3 years, through the passing of springs and summers, autumn harvests and winter storages. Mother treated me better and better, even occasionally gently tying my hair for me. Those were my happiest moments. One day when I returned home, I found mother was nowhere to be seen. I panicked. I searched everywhere nearby but still couldn't find her. At 13, I was already far more mature than my peers, following the faint clues, I discovered traces of the neighboring hunter's visit, though called next door, it was actually quite far away. A hunter settled there half a year ago, and we rarely met. With money I'd saved for a long time, I bought a jar of fine wine and asked him for a wild hare in return. I gave him the wine as a token of gratitude. He happily accepted it without reminding me that the wine was far more valuable than the hare. After getting drunk, the hunter revealed my mother's whereabouts. It turned out he had accidentally seen my mother's true beauty beneath her disheveled hair and was so struck by her that he tried to force himself on her. My mother smashed his head in anger, and in a fit of rage, he tied her up and sold to a traveling merchant. It's probably reached a very distant place by now. My mother was quite beautiful, so she fetched a good price. The hunter was smug about it, expressionless. I picked up the axe in his house and hacked him to death with my own hands, then dragged his body to a distant wolf-infested forest, erasing all traces of my presence. It was my first time killing someone. My hands trembled all night. The next day, villagers who went into the mountains to gather herbs discovered the strong man who had been eaten by wolves, and they all warned the townsfolk to beware of wild beasts. I sold everything of value in the house, barely scraping together some travel money, and splurged on a few flatbreads before setting off to search for my mother. At that time, a drought was raging, and famine had struck many regions to the point where people resorted to exchanging children to eat. Passing through one disaster-stricken area, all my money and those few flatbreads were snatched away in the chaos. I wiped the dust from my face but didn't dare chase after the looters. My mother was stunningly beautiful, a peerless beauty. I inherited her looks, surpassing even her. I was afraid someone would brush off the dust and dirt from my face, after a long and winding pursuit. I arrived at a bustling, prosperous city, a scene completely different from the disaster area, tattered and filthy, with no food left. I was forced to beg as I walked, abandoning my dignity just for a bit of spoiled food, but I was too weak and scrawny to compete with the other beggars and refugees. Starving and dizzy, I stumbled along the road and collided head-on with a luxurious carriage. The driver lashed me with a whip without hesitation, full of arrogance, and began cursing loudly. Where did this beggar come from, so blind to his surroundings? Do you think you can bear the consequences of disturbing nobility? I was struck so hard I fell to the ground, a bloody mark on my hand, instantly sobered by the pain, staring at the luxurious carriage before me. I felt doomed. Today might end with me beaten to death and dumped in a mass grave. The coachman raised his whip to strike again, but was stopped. A pale, slender hand lightly rested on the lash, and as the man lifted the carriage curtain to step out, his clear, melodious voice reached my ears. "Don't hit her," he said. 7. At that moment, I actually wanted to cry. Since I can remember, I've endured so many injuries, but never once has anyone softly said, "Don't hit her." It's just a very simple sentence. That was the first time I saw Gulu. The young man stood beside a tall steed, his white robes pristine, noble and radiant, with jade-like beauty. His deep eyes looked down at me on the ground. Unlike the dog-like arrogance of the coachman, the nobleman himself showed no trace of superiority. Instead, he spoke gently. He had his attendant buy a steamed bun and handed it to me himself. I numbly took the large, fragrant steamed bun, then stared blankly at him. At that time, I didn't know his identity, only that he was a rare and noble person. My fingertips trembled slightly, suddenly kneeling at his feet. I clutched a corner of the nobleman's robe, audaciously halting his departure. 2 clear tears streamed from my eyes as I gazed up at him with a pitiful, vulnerable posture, pleading in a mournful voice, "Young master, I beg you to save my daughter's life," using an exaggerated and dramatic phrase to catch his attention. I then slowly explained the whole story, how I couldn't find my mother and no longer wished to live. The person before me seemed to be a kind-hearted noble. I was gambling, betting that he would be willing to help me. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the part of his robe I had grabbed was now stained, and my face paled slightly. In chaotic times, human life is cheap. My worthless life isn't even as valuable as a noble's garment. This is a high-stakes gamble. If I offend the noble, I might die. The noble's dark, intense eyes fixed on me as he stepped back, pulling free the corner of his robe I had grasped. From a not too close distance, he commanded, 15, "Go help her find it." He was willing to help me. Then he boarded the carriage and disappeared into the crowd. A trivial matter, of course, was not worth the nobleman's personal attention, but he was indeed kind-hearted and left a personal guard to accompany me. At that time, I was only 13 years old. Having grown up in a small mountain village with little exposure to people or the wider world, relying solely on instinct and a slightly higher level of maturity than my peers, I taught myself to fake tears, appear vulnerable, and look pitiful. Perhaps for me at that time, I truly possessed extraordinary talent and courage, but looking back now, I realize how naive and immature I was back then, in the eyes of Crown Prince Gulu at that time. My little schemes must have appeared laughably clumsy and affected, yet he still left his most trusted personal guard to assist me. Sherwoo, having grown up with him since childhood, proved to be the most capable and trusted one, finding my mother's whereabouts in less than 4 hours. Left to my own devices, I might have starved to death on the streets without ever seeing my mother again. They were different, powerful and influential, commanding even the highest-ranking officials in the city. As expected, my mother was sold to a brothel, and she was the madam's most prized possession. However, she suffered a breakdown and became increasingly erratic, injuring several clients in a row. To this day, she hasn't truly begun receiving customers. The brothel's madam gradually lost patience with her and is now using private punishments to force her submission. When the old woman saw me, her eyes lit up like lanterns. Despite my filthy, foul appearance, enough to make even stray dogs avoid me, she exclaimed in admiration, "What a stunning beauty in the making." Just as she reached out to grab me, 15 raised his blade and sliced off half of her long, sharp fingernail. He tossed her a gold ingot and said, "I'm here to redeem someone." Had the blade veered even slightly, it would have severed her hand instead. The madam didn't dare to keep staring at me, hearing someone wanted to buy my mother. She didn't dare to ask further questions. People in brothels are skilled at reading situations and know exactly what kind of people must never be provoked. The crown prince had concealed his identity to inspect the disaster area and was merely passing through this place. The carriages and horses were all provided by local officials, unlike that temporarily hired coachman. The prince's personal guards were all exceptional individuals. 15 had a round face and round eyes, with adorable canine teeth when he smiled, making him seem approachable, yet when it came to balancing kindness and authority, he was never ambiguous. This commanding presence was cultivated through long-term exposure at the prince's side. We stormed into the torture chamber together. Upon seeing the bound damsel in distress, 15 was utterly shocked. He never expected the filthy little beggar's mother to be such a beauty. Then he turned to scrutinize the dirt on my face and suddenly showed an expression of enlightenment. As he was leaving, he slipped a dagger into my hand and patted my head. "Little one, take this for protection." A colleague who came to see him widened his eyes. "This is His Highness. This is the young master's favorite dagger. You're giving away the inlaid one. Aren't you afraid the young master will chase you down and beat you up?" Though he said that, his body remained rooted in place, making no move to stop him. 15 laughed in reply. "Of course I'm afraid, that's why I'm making a run for it." With that, he really ran off, and the other person chased after him, both disappearing into the crowd. I stood still, examining the plain and unadorned dagger in my hand. It must have originally been inlaid with many priceless gemstones, all pried off, leaving only the pure black hilt and silver-white blade, reflecting a cold gleam. A lavish and valuable dagger in the hands of a little beggar would be like a crime of possessing treasure. A seemingly ordinary yet razor-sharp dagger in the hands of a little beggar could truly serve as self-defense. In my youthful ignorance, I worried for a long time about that smiling guard who was like an older brother, fearing he would be punished. Only later did I realize that if it weren't for the crown prince's tacit permission, who else could take his belongings and give them to others? The bun he personally handed me, I couldn't bear to eat it and kept it close to my chest, where it burned my skin red. On the way back when my mother wanted to eat it, I broke the cold bun open and discovered several pieces of broken gold hidden inside. Shiny, beautiful fragments of gold. Though occupying a high position, he still showed compassion for the suffering of common people. That exceptional Gulu, I only saw once in my life, fleeting like a night blooming Sirius, leaving behind a rainbow-hued afterimage. I might be quite ungrateful, unable to even remember my benefactor's face. The youthful features of that golden-saddled white horse rider gradually blurred in my memory, but I'll always remember those jade-white slender hands handing me a steamed bun, a large, fragrant steamed bun that concealed flecks of gold. 8. This happened before my rebirth. Something this lifetime's Gulu also experienced. That's why I say saving him was repaying his former kindness. This makes perfect sense. Gulu seems to have bought it, but he wasn't willing to stay at my place. When I returned from herb gathering, Gulu had already disappeared. I searched for him at his usual haunts. For several days, Gulu kept avoiding me, unwilling to get involved with me, but I'm stubborn, insisting on finding him and following him around, even when he wears a cold expression and gives me the silent treatment. Until he was dragged to the racecourse by a group of good-for-nothing rich kids who made fun of him, got kicked in the chest by a horse's hoof, and fainted on the spot. I kept waiting until those people finally left, then once again picked up the battered Gulu and brought him back. This time, Gulu took a long while to wake up. Seeing the familiar dilapidated thatched hut, he unsurprisingly spotted me. His cracked thin lips moved slightly, and after a long pause, he said, "If there's a next time, don't save me." Holding a steaming bowl of medicine, I blew on it to cool it down for him and replied casually, "Sure thing, but finish this medicine first." Smack, he didn't take it, raising his hand to knock over the medicine bowl. Struggling to get up and leave, I watched him take 2 steps before collapsing to the ground again, clutching his chest, his pale and handsome face contorted in pain. I quickly stepped forward to help him back to bed, cleaned up the mess, went outside to prepare another bowl of medicine, and returned to carefully blow on the steaming decoction as before, without a hint of impatience. When the medicine reached a lukewarm temperature, I offered it to him again, but Gulu refused to take it. I kept holding it out, and we remained at an impasse. Gulu and I locked eyes for a long time, revealing a faint, mocking smile. "You don't need to do this. You saved my life last time, and the debt of gratitude has been repaid. Besides, it was just a small effort on my part. Not worth all this. How much good can a single steamed bun do?" 9. Yes, indeed, how good can a single steamed bun really be? Only those who are severely deprived of love would mistake the slightest kindness casually given by others as the redemption of their lifetime, and then throw themselves into it without hesitation. The faintest hint of kindness carelessly dropped by a savior is enough to fill the barren life of a pitiable soul. But that wasn't me. I might have taken after my cold-blooded, heartless father. I wouldn't risk my life out of gratitude for just a steamed bun. After being reborn, I wanted to save Gulu, desperately so. Not just because of the little kindness he once showed me. Of course, there were other reasons, but I would never tell him. In my past life, Gulu met a tragic end. As tyrants are rightfully condemned by all, I don't want to bring up those painful memories. Even though this lifetime's Gulu hasn't experienced them yet, I'll stay by his side, protect him, help him avoid the detours he once took, and prevent him from becoming the tyrant he was in my past life, only to die a miserable death. I wish him safety, smooth sailing, and radiant brilliance. I know why Gulu dislikes me. I understand him all too well. The current Gulu isn't yet irredeemably wicked. He avoids me simply because he doesn't want to drag me down. The entire Luo city is controlled by Consort Sun's distant relatives. They suppress Gulu, making him universally despised, forcing him to live as a beggar, humiliated, tormented, and barely surviving. In the past, anyone who showed even the slightest kindness to Gulu would secretly face retaliation. Gradually, no one was willing to see him anymore, avoiding him at all costs. But he couldn't outstubborn me. If he wanted to leave, I wouldn't stop him. I'd just follow him persistently. When he fainted, I'd carry him back. If he refused to take medicine, I'd brew it again and again, bowl after bowl. I kept gazing at him with tender eyes, not the least bit angry. In the end, Gulu took the medicine and rested in my dilapidated hut to recover. I also took the opportunity to heal the old injury on his leg. Those spoiled rich kids remembered Gulu again. They came to my house but didn't find him, feeling tricked, so they wrecked my already impoverished thatched cottage into complete disarray. I had already moved my mother and Gulu to that old hunter's house. It had been abandoned for years, remote enough that outsiders couldn't easily find it. I stood watching them from the tall grass nearby, and when I saw their leader, the prefect's son, that distant relative of Consort Sun, I suddenly remembered he had once stolen something very important from Gulu. I gazed at him with dark, unreadable eyes. 10. While gathering herbs in the mountains, I casually picked many wild gardenias, disguised as a flower girl. I sold flowers near the prefect's residence for several days. Carefully observing the daily movements of the prefect's portly son, I noticed he would go out alone every few days to secretly meet a young and alluring widow from a nearby village. Since this was a clandestine affair, he wouldn't be surrounded by his usual entourage of rowdy friends and servants like during his normal outings. Seizing the opportunity, I waited in ambush along the route he always took when returning home alone. Slowly, I adorned my hair with a few pure white wild gardenias, washed off the face-altering herbal paste in a roadside stream, swept aside the hair covering most of my face, and turned around as if by chance, met the stunned gaze of the fat pig. The prefect's son often bullied men and harassed women, a true lecher, whose first instinct was naturally to lunge and try to grab me. My eyes filled with panic as I stumbled backward in a frantic escape. As I ran, somehow I ended up in an even more desolate place, with the fat pig man not far behind, shouting for me to stop. I truly did stop right where I was. I turned around, shedding all pretense of innocence and panic. watching expressionlessly as he took 2 steps forward and fell into the wild boar trap set by the villagers. The man died a rather gruesome death, with sharp spikes piercing through his entire body. Using a hook, I retrieved one of the jade tokens from his waist, seeing the faint character "Yi" on it. I carefully tucked the token into my sleeve, covered my footprints with fallen leaves, and silently slipped away. In just a few days, news of the prefect's son stepping into a trap and meeting his demise will spread. It was an accident, no murderer, and no one will be punished for it. As for why he wandered to such a remote place, perhaps it was due to his many misdeeds, encountering vengeful spirits come to claim his life. 11. To return the same way would require passing through the city gates. To leave no trace, I took a long detour, climbing over several mountains to get home, but slipped and had my leg struck by falling rocks along the way. The rock pinned my foot, blood seeping out. I wasn't concerned about my own pain. I pulled out the jade pendant again to make sure it hadn't been dirted, and only then did I sigh in relief. This was something left to Gulu by his mother, the only keepsake his mother left him, something extremely important. When Gulu was first exiled to Luoqing, those people saw him instinctively protecting this jade pendant even while being beaten, so they deliberately snatched it and mockingly fastened it to their own waist in front of him. Now I've taken it back. The night grew deeper, and the sounds of wild beasts stirring echoed nearby. Still pondering how to escape, I saw a flickering torchlight approaching from afar. Gulu held the torch in his left hand and the axe in his right, gazing at me from a distance with tightly pressed thin lips. Then he raised his hand and felled a tall bamboo beside him with a single axe strike. The thick bamboo trunk, along with its branches and leaves, crashed noisily beside me. A few short growls of beasts sounded, and I glimpsed dark shadows fleeing in fright. Unbeknownst to me, several wild wolves had stealthily approached and were lying in wait behind me. Gulu quickened his pace to catch up with me, looking somewhat angry. "Why are you staying on the mountain so late at night instead of going home?" Instead of answering, I asked in surprise, "How did you find me?" Before he could speak, I noticed the fine scratches on his face and hands from the reeds by the eastern shore, and the burrs from the western wasteland caught on his clothes. And I understood. He should have searched step by step, from east to west, searching relentlessly until he finally found me who hadn't returned home late at night. Once again, I felt that sudden urge to cry. It's not that I've never gotten lost or injured in the mountains before, but no one had ever come looking for me, searching tirelessly for me. I signaled Gulu to hand me the torch. He carefully moved the stone pinning my leg, tore a piece of his clothing to bandage me simply, then carried me down the mountain on his back. He's still angry. His silence means he's sulking. The moon in the sky is big and round, its full brilliance shining upon the world. No matter how far we go, the moon always follows above. The passing puddle rippled in the gentle breeze, its shimmering fragments of light quiet and still. Anyway, the moon is bright enough. We can see the path clearly without a torch, I said, then casually tossed the torch in my hand into the puddle. Then, in the brief moment before Gulu could voice his confusion, I used my freed hand to pull out that jade pendant and placed it around his neck. Gulu froze. Belatedly, I explained, the reason I couldn't make it home before dark was because I killed someone to retrieve something, which made me take a longer route back. I didn't shy away from describing to Gulu just how ruthless I could be, withholding only one detail. I told him I'd witnessed the scene where his jade pendant was stolen, so I knew how much he treasured it. I lied to him. Truth be told, I hadn't been reborn yet at that time and didn't recognize him at all. It was my past life's experience that told me this mattered greatly to him. The cool jade pendant, still warm from my body heat, hung over his heart. I couldn't see Gulu's expression, only the back of his head, his ink-black hair, and the faint redness of his ears. After a long silence, he finally carried me on his back, stepping through clusters of fireflies along the moonlit shore, walking steadily forward with me. He whispered, "Atao, this is just an inanimate object, not worth taking such risks for." Of course I know, it's merely an inanimate object, but this object is the only memento Gulu's mother left behind. Moreover, neither Gulu nor his enemies currently realize that this jade pendant is actually a command token. The Yi family has a covert force that only recognizes this token. It was a sharp blade left by the late Empress Shi to protect Gulu. She simply didn't have time to explain its significance before her sudden departure. In the previous life, this jade pendant was snatched away, and no one retrieved it. The prefect's son treated it as an ordinary accessory to play with, then casually gave it to a servant when he grew tired of it, passing through several hands. After Crown Prince Gulu was deposed, those around him were also punished, with many exiled to Luoqing. However, Gulu was isolated and could not see any relatives or old friends. 15 was performing labor in a distant military camp when he unexpectedly saw Gulu's jade pendant being used as a drinking wager. Recognizing it as his former master's possession, he desperately tried to reclaim it. The crowd mocked this lowly laborer, demanding he wager his own arm. If he wanted it, he'd have to win it back, without hesitation. 15 let them chop off one of his arms. Bleeding profusely, he won the jade pendant and clutched it tightly with his remaining hand, but the crowd, unwilling to accept their loss, threw the already half-dead 15 into the horse training grounds. In my memory, the kind and smiling 15 who was like an elder brother could have been granted a minor general's title and fought valiantly on the battlefield. Even if he hadn't become a guard in the Eastern Palace, he would have died gloriously, shedding blood amidst enemy forces. Yet in the end, he lost an arm and breathed his last under the trampling hooves of his own country's cavalry. His blood soaked the jade pendant, causing the patterns on it to change, and thus Governor Sun learned the true purpose of the pendant. In the end, Consort Sun's faction gained control of that unstoppable covert force. The sword Emperor Shi left for Gulu to protect himself became a blade turned against him, forming the greatest obstacle in his bloody journey back to the capital. Gulu narrowly escaped death several times on the road. Later, he ascended the throne as the new emperor, only to be overthrown and meet a desolate end. The power behind this jade pendant was a significant contributing factor. Now I've taken it back. The heirloom of Gulu's mother no longer needs to be passed around or treated as a gambling stake. 15. Who grew up with Gulu won't die tragically under chaotic hooves because of it. When Gulu returns to the capital in the future, there won't be a blade constantly hanging overhead as a threat. The blade returned to the hand that should have wielded it, striking at the enemy it was meant to strike. The night breeze blew, bringing a chill. With my arms around Gulu's neck, I nestled gently against him for warmth, and under the dreamlike radiance of the moonlight filling the world, I leaned close to his ear and whispered earnestly, "It's worth it. Things we cherish must be treated with care." In my past life, this was told to me by that handsome yet bloodthirsty tyrant whom everyone feared. 12. The second time I met Gulu in my past life was in the Imperial Palace, 1,000 miles away. Within the lofty and extravagant Imperial Palace, dressed in silks and satins I'd never worn in this lifetime, with an intricately styled hairdo adorned with jade and gold-silver hairpins. The excessively soft fabric made me momentarily uncomfortable as I stiffly shrank among the crowd. On this warm and sunny spring day, the newly entered palace concubines arranged to admire flowers together. My personal maid accepted the invitation on my behalf, urging me to socialize more with them to build relationships. Forced to stroll with them in the imperial garden, I watched as they composed poetry about a single flower or blade of grass, expressing their melancholic sentiments of spring's passing and autumn's sorrow. Unable to contribute to their conversations, I felt distinctly out of place and instinctively positioned myself at the edge of the group. Suddenly, a eunuch announced the emperor's arrival. The crowd immediately fell silent, kneeling by the roadside to make way for his majesty. The warm breeze carried a chilling tension, and some timid concubines even began to tremble. It's no wonder they were so terrified. Even I, who grew up in such a remote mountain village, had heard of the new emperor's cruelty and brutality. Back then, I didn't know who the white-clad youth who once gave me a steamed bun was, and of course, I wouldn't have connected him to the infamous tyrant thousands of miles away. All I had heard was that the tyrant was once a deposed crown prince, exiled to a border town, only to fight his way back to the capital, killing his father and brothers to claim the throne. I've heard that the tyrant has a green face and fangs, resembling a demon, capable of silencing a crying child at night. He is capricious in mood, addicted to killing, cruel and despotic, leaving everyone in the court and the palace trembling with fear. It is said that just 2 days ago, the tyrant executed a palace concubine simply because she tried to win his favor by dancing in a red dress along his usual path after court. The tyrant found her an eyesore and immediately drew his sword to stab her to death. Then he used the delicate beauty's blood to water the crimson begonia flowers nearby, saying it looked much better that way. Everyone in the imperial palace was on edge. No one dared to harbor any ulterior motives. The tyrant showed little interest in women. Most concubines in the palace were beauties sent by subordinates to curry favor, or noble ladies selected by the Ministry of Revenue through formal procedures. To him, they were merely tools to balance the power of aristocratic ministers. He paid them no attention unless they came before him and became an eyesore. Those who did would meet the same fate as the beauty from days prior, encountering the tyrant on the path. The group of new concubines prostrated themselves, not daring to lift their heads. From the corner of my eye, I glimpsed pure black robe hems sweeping past, their swift movement revealing dark golden embroidery. Suddenly, someone behind me pushed me forward. I fell in the middle of the road, right in front of the tyrant's feet. He halted his steps, eyes from all directions turned toward me, shocked, sympathetic, gloating. The weight of those gazes pressed upon me, and the air seemed to freeze for an instant. In the tyrant's harem, there was no such thing as concubines vying for favor. I didn't know who wanted to harm me, or why. The stench of blood from that beauty days ago still lingered between the blue bricks. Of course I was terrified, at a loss, yet I maintained composure on the surface, following the dark golden dragon patterns coiled on his black robe upwards. I finally saw the true face of the tyrant feared by all. The rumors weren't wrong, his face was covered with pitted, horrifying scars, ghastly like a demon. Enough to make one retch. Beneath the scars lay a pallid face and pitch-black eyes. An overwhelming aura emanated from him, carrying a faint scent of blood. He was staring at me too. A pampered concubine who'd been spoiled since childhood burst into tears nearby. The tyrant turned to look, his expression blank, and issued a casual command, slash, amid the woman's shrill, terrified pleas for mercy and the clanking of armor as guards moved about. The tyrant looked down at me and asked, "What is your name?" I answered cautiously, "This humble concubine is Lu Xian." He lifted my chin with his icy fingers, gazed into my eyes, and spoke with a hint of mockery in his voice. "You're lying." 13. When Lu Qingshi arrived, he pretentiously carried thorny branches on his back, putting on a full show of the bearing brambles to ask for punishment. Gesture. How hypocritical. It reminds me of when I first met this biological father half a month ago, wearing a benevolent smile with the same hypocritical demeanor, saying he wanted to bring my mother and me home. This was the first year of Jia era. While storms of change swept through the distant imperial capital, our small mountain village remained perpetually peaceful and serene. It was the 18th year that mother and I had been living together in these remote mountains. I secretly learned embroidery from her, imitating her style to stitch pieces for the fabric shop, selling both our works for coin. For months I secretly saved coppers to buy those fragrant rice cakes from the street vendor, carrying them home excitedly to surprise mother. But when I returned home, mother was gone. By our worn wooden table sat a man in luxurious silks, smiling gently with paternal warmth in his eyes. "Do you recognize this official?" I watched him warily, refusing to engage with his words. The man wasn't angered and continued, "I am your father, the current prime minister, here to bring you and your mother back to the capital." Of course I knew he was my biological father whom I'd never met. I recognized it at first glance, given the resemblance in our eyes and brows. But I didn't care who he was or why he'd come. The only thing I cared about was, where is my mother? He avoided answering and instead had someone bring over many gold, silver, and jewels, saying they were gifts for our first meeting. Then he immediately wanted to take me away. Luoqing is too remote, and the journey to the capital will take much time. We can't afford delays. Let's set off back tonight. A poor village girl from a small mountain hamlet suddenly discovers she's the daughter of a high-ranking noble. Her biological father is not only kind and gentle but also showers her with precious gifts upon their first meeting. She must be overjoyed. How could she possibly refuse? But that poor village girl happens to be me, stubborn, obstinate, and utterly impractical. I was only worried about my mother's safety and had no intention of leaving with a stranger for no reason. The man finally lost his patience, tearing off his hypocritical mask of kindness. With a cold expression, half angry and half threatening, he said, "Your mother is already on her way to the capital. If you want to see her safe and sound, you'd better behave." He had people forcibly take me away. A group of people trashed our little house. The rice cakes I'd saved up copper coins to buy were thrown on the ground. Someone stepped on them, and the once snow-white treats were now covered in dirt, kicked aside in disgust. They were all nobles from the capital, their eyes only valuing the chests full of gold and silver treasures. No one cared about this shabby, leaky house, or that package of crude, cheap pastries I could only afford to buy once in a long while. I did indeed see my mother at Chancellor Lu's residence in the capital. Lu Qingshi only let me catch a distant glimpse of her before pushing me away. He confined me to a secluded courtyard where I rarely saw anyone, but from the fragmented words of the servants, I gradually pieced together my own situation. Back then, Lu Qingshi abandoned my mother in a thatched mountain hut to fend for herself while he went elsewhere to take up an official post. He progressed through the imperial examinations, rose through the ranks, achieved the top scholar title, married a noblewoman from an influential family, and smoothly advanced his political career until he became chancellor. Lu Qingshi is widely known as a virtuous minister. Commoners, court officials, and even the late emperor praised him for possessing both talent and virtue. with his heart set on the welfare of the people. They also lauded him as a once-in-a-century exemplary husband and father. During a spring outing, he met his current wife, a talented scholar and a beautiful lady who connected through poetry, falling in love at first sight, which became a celebrated romance in the capital. Later, Lu Qingshi married that noble lady and remained steadfastly devoted, never taking concubines, wholeheartedly committed to his wife. When his wife accidentally fell into water during pregnancy, she gave premature birth to a daughter and suffered physical harm, rendering her unable to bear children again. Yet, he never abandoned her, showering his only wife and legitimate daughter with boundless affection, so much so that it became widely known. Everyone praises Minister Lu for his devoted love, and everyone envies Lady Lu for having found such a good husband. Later, as power shifted and a tyrant ascended the throne, the Ministry of Revenue held a widespread selection of beauties. As the noble-born daughter of the Prime Minister, she was naturally registered in the roster. That noble-born daughter was named Lu Xian. Lu Qingshi rushed overnight to the remote city of Luo, kidnapped my mother, and used her to threaten and control me, forcing me to enter the palace in her stead. Lu Xian was a premature baby, frail and sickly since childhood, spending most of her time recuperating quietly at the countryside manor. Few people had seen her, and with our slight resemblance, swapping identities to deceive others was the simplest thing in the world. The new emperor was cruel, and the palace was fraught with danger everywhere. Lu Qingshi couldn't bear to see his pampered legitimate daughter suffer, so that's when he finally remembered me. You see, he wasn't unaware of my existence, he just didn't remember me until I became useful to him. But despite all his calculations, he never expected that while everyone else was fooled, the new emperor saw through his scheme the moment he laid eyes on me. This is the crime of deceiving the emperor. Lu Qingshi knelt before the hall with thorny branches on his back, pleading guilty. This humble official was foolish. It's all my fault for failing to discipline this unfilial daughter properly. She was picked up by me from the roadside out of pity and adopted as a foster daughter. Never did I expect that she would covet wealth and glory, steal Yenner's identity token without permission, knock Yenner unconscious, and impersonate her to participate in the imperial selection. And recently, I've been preoccupied with official duties, neglecting my daughter's affairs, only learning the truth when Your Majesty exposed her. This girl's crimes are unforgivable and warrant execution. May Your Majesty judge wisely. Lu Qingshi shifted all the blame onto me, leaving himself completely clean. Hanging at his waist was an exquisitely embroidered pouch, clearly the handiwork of my mother. He was warning me, my mother's life was in his hands, and I had to obey his words. Just like the day he sent me into the palace, he handed me a willow branch plucked from my mother's courtyard, telling me I must obey the words of my personal palace maid. She was his planted spy to monitor me. 14. I knelt numbly to the side, staring blankly at the ground as if the father shouting for my execution in the hall wasn't mine, as if I didn't care whether I lived or died. Lu Qingshi spouted a stream of words that seemed like repentance but were actually excuses, while the tyrant sat unmoved on his throne, leisurely sipping wine from his cup, seemingly indifferent to the proceedings. It wasn't until Lu Qingshi declared he would uphold justice by eliminating his own kin and personally discipline me that the tyrant finally lifted his eyelids. The priceless glass cup in his hand was casually tossed forward, shattering at Lu's feet to halt his advance. The tyrant's voice sounded weary, as if casually asking, overstepping one's authority. These words carried serious weight. No emperor would tolerate ministers acting on their own initiative. Lu Qingshi turned pale with fright, kowtowing repeatedly. This humble official wouldn't dare. The tyrant seemed in no mood for bloodshed today. As always, his temper was unpredictable and his thoughts inscrutable. He declared, within 3 days, I want to see your legitimate daughter appear in the palace. He waved his hand dismissively, signaling everyone to withdraw. Since he didn't specify how to deal with me, it means any punishment would be inconsequential. After a long while, the eunuch by his side came out and said, Minister Lu, as the Prime Minister of the nation, your contributions are immense. His Majesty will not pursue this matter today, but we hope you will remain vigilant in the future and avoid repeating such mistakes. Also, since this girl has already entered the palace, she should be given a status. The crime of deceiving the emperor by swapping identities was just glossed over like this, with no one being punished. Those who don't know might think the current emperor is such a gentle person. Yet this is precisely what makes all the court officials tremble with fear day and night. When he beheads someone with a single sword stroke, he disregards all laws and rituals. When he grows weary and dismisses the crime of deceiving the emperor, he similarly ignores all norms. Nothing can restrain him. His danger lies in being utterly lawless and chaotic. No one knew what he was thinking. Even an old fox like Lu Qingshi couldn't fathom his intentions and could only comply. He took me back to the Lu family, opened the ancestral hall's door, and casually wrote a name in the family registry. Putting down the brush, he looked at me. From now on, your name will be Lu Tian. From this day forward, you need no longer use another's name or identity. 15. His naming was perfunctory. Back then I was still illiterate and didn't realize that the character Tian meant superfluous, whereas Shi and Yan are both characters carrying beautiful meanings and blessings. As the Lu family's illegitimate daughter, I was re-registered in the imperial household records, granted a neither high nor low rank, and assigned a neither good nor bad palace. Lu Xian entered the palace as the highest-ranking noble consort. No sooner had she settled into her new palace than she summoned me, circling around to scrutinize me from all angles before pinching my face hard with a mocking laugh. So you're the daughter born to that woman. My father has hidden you two so well. Only letting me know now. You're quite beautiful indeed, even though outsiders flatter my father by proclaiming me as the capital's #1 beauty. Seeing you makes me realize how laughable that title truly is. From the looks of it, your mother must have been an utterly bewitching vixen. Lu Xian had a frail body but a far from weak temperament, arrogant and domineering to the extreme. Her sharp nails dug into my flesh, leaving glaring red marks. She casually picked up a hairpin and traced it across my face. Vixens like you deserve to die. Such a pretty face ought to be ruined. The hairpin pressed against my face, drawing a trace of blood. I gazed at her quietly. I had a knife hidden in my sleeve, ready to stab her, break free, and flee. It was the only way of resistance I could think of, but even if I escaped, what then? Could I truly flee these layered palace walls? And my mother was still in Lu Qingshi's grasp. I never resisted, remaining too calm all along. Lu Xian suddenly lost interest, tossed the hairpin aside, and smoothed her disheveled hair. You may leave. This consort is weary. I walked out, where a graceful woman in white stood by the door, approaching with concern. Ouch, how did this even draw blood? This is too much. She pressed a handkerchief to the bleeding cut on my cheek to stop the flow, her eyes filled with pity. I didn't know her, so I pushed her hand away and stepped back 2 paces. She paused before finally remembering to introduce herself to me. She said she was my half-sister, Lu Shirong, the daughter of Lu Qingshi and another woman, making her Lu Xian's half-sister as well. When Lu Qingshi was still an official in Luoqing, he had concubines in his household who bore him a daughter. Later, after marrying in the capital, he dismissed his former concubines but kept the eldest daughter from them. Few knew of her existence. This time, Lu Qingshi sent her into the palace as well. Essentially as part of Lu Xian's dowry. Lu Xian had always been domineering, and Lu Shirong often suffered her bullying at home. Seeing me being mistreated, she felt a sense of shared suffering but didn't dare to intervene, so she stood at the door for a long time. Lu Shirong led me to a side chamber, meticulously and tenderly applying medicinal ointment to my wounds. Her delicate features and gentle demeanor embodied the very image of an elder sister. This was something I had never experienced before, perhaps what people call familial affection. I stood dazed as she tended to me. When Lu Shirong saw me out, she pressed a bottle of healing salve into my hand and smiled softly. Yenner has always been willful since childhood. I never dared imagine that one day I would gain such a sweet younger sister. From now on, let us support each other. Having companionship in this deep palace matters greatly. This is premium golden wound medicine I've been reluctant to use. Take it and apply generously, never skimp. A young lady's face is of utmost importance. Yenner, that's just how she is. You'd better avoid her as much as possible from now on. As she spoke, Lu Shirong's smile turned bitter, her eyes filled with untold sorrow. I nodded in agreement and walked back to my palace under her watchful gaze. Passing by the imperial kitchen, I spotted a scruffy, ugly gray rabbit in the corner. It was curled up by the gutter at the base of the wall, its patchy gray-white fur disheveled, one ear missing a large chunk, whiskers trembling slightly with its rapid breathing. A perfectly ordinary rabbit destined for slaughter, escaped from the imperial kitchen. But when those pure black eyes cautiously looked up at you, it suddenly evoked an overwhelming sense of pity. I picked it up and took it home to raise. Having grown up raising livestock for sale in the mountains, keeping a rabbit was just a trivial matter for me. In this palace courtyard, the main hall still had no primary consort residing there, only a concubine lived in the side hall opposite. She was the daughter of the Marquis of Loyalty and Valor's household. From what I recall, she was quite reclusive, unwilling to interact with others, and I had no connection with her whatsoever, until one day, when I opened my window and found her utterly mesmerized, watching my little rabbit nibble on grass. She observed with such fascination for 1 or 2 hours. When discovered, she showed no panic. For the first time, she greeted me, and somehow, the two of us inexplicably became close. Her name was Wei Qingyu, a daughter of a military family, yet she excelled at making pastries. The only flaw was that she always added too much sugar, sickeningly sweet. Over time, the palace maids and eunuchs in the courtyard would find excuses to flee whenever they heard her tinkering in the small kitchen again. Those who couldn't escape would pretend to take a few bites before secretly tossing them away. I'm the only one who's not picky. I'll eat whatever she makes and never waste food. Wei Qingyu was so moved she proposed we become sworn sisters, though we share no blood. When Lu Shirong heard this, she scolded her for wishful thinking, saying Lu Tian already has real sisters. Then the two of them would start bickering with sarcastic remarks. Every day I cut grass to feed the rabbits and embroider handkerchiefs for Lu Shirong and Wei Qingyu. The days are monotonous and repetitive, but it's also a rare tranquility. My mother is at the Prime Minister's residence, and only occasionally does her personal maid bring news of her well-being. I deliberately avoided Lu Xian, and she didn't come to trouble me either. I heard the tyrant went on a western tour to a distant place, so I haven't seen him for a long time. 16. I thought there would be no further connection between us. It was said that the tyrant went on a journey westward, slaughtering indiscriminately along the way, leaving officials and gentry in chaos. Just as the tyrant grew weary of killing and returned to the palace, and the local authorities breathed a sigh of relief after seeing off this formidable figure, someone happened to offend the emperor's procession halfway and was taken back to the imperial city and thrown into the dungeon. Coincidentally, that person was a renowned miracle doctor, known far and wide for his kindness and generosity, often providing free medical treatment to the common people and greatly beloved by them. Upon hearing that the miracle doctor had been imprisoned in the dungeon, people from all over who had received his kindness jointly petitioned for his pardon. The local officials and gentry were once again in a dilemma, but dared not submit a memorial to plead for him. Because when someone at court mentioned it, the tyrant executed several ministers on the spot, their blood flowing down the steps. For several days in a row, the tyrant went on a frenzied killing spree, casting a heavy and oppressive atmosphere over the court and the imperial harem. At this moment, a palace maid from Lu Xian's quarters found me, holding a medicine bowl on a tray and signaling for me to take it. His Majesty's headaches have been acting up again recently. Concerned for His Majesty, the noble consort personally prepared the medicine and intended to deliver it herself, but she suddenly felt unwell. As her own sister, she specifically instructed you to take her place. This was clearly ill-intentioned. Earlier in the day, rumors had spread in the palace about a pair of foreign-born twin beauties who, unaware of the palace dynamics, had sent soup to the Hall of Diligent Governance upon hearing of His Majesty's discomfort. After 2 screams, they were never seen again. They were sending me to my death. Seeing my prolonged silence, the palace maid smiled again. I heard the master has been hiding a woman of unknown origins in the matter. The mistress already knows and is heartbroken. Who knows if she might sell the woman to a brothel. I took the bowl of medicine, gave her a deep look, memorized her face, then turned and walked toward the Hall of Diligent Governance. This was a place I'd never been before. Outside the hall, a group of people knelt trembling. Several officials in court robes were being beaten with boards outside the hall, but dared not cry out in pain. They bit down on their hands until their mouths filled with blood to endure the punishment. No one stopped me. Entering the great hall and rounding the screen, I saw 2 headless corpses lying in the center. Any of those delicate noble ladies would have fainted or vomited on the spot. My steps paused briefly before I lowered my gaze and continued forward. The tyrant was holding court, seated high on his throne with his forehead propped on one hand, clearly suffering from a headache. His complexion was poor. The gloomy, cold daylight filtering through the windows cast a pallid glow around him, making his entire presence seem both violent and oppressive. Several ministers below were frequently wiping cold sweat from their brows. I quietly passed by them, carefully placing the medicine bowl on the tyrant's desk, just about to retreat silently when someone below me spoke, angering the tyrant. He suddenly stood up, sweeping all the memorials, writing brushes, and even the freshly brewed medicine off the table with a loud clatter, causing the group below to prostrate themselves in plea for mercy. The tyrant drew his sword and beheaded a minister, his voice icy. Get out, all of you. He kicked away the head at his feet and hurled his long sword violently to the ground. They scrambled out in panic. Before I could retreat, his peripheral gaze caught me. He seized my throat, his expression dark and sinister, eyes bloodshot with a cold, frenzied sharpness. Why are you still here? Have you come to assassinate me too? I vaguely sensed something strange about his state, but being choked, I couldn't utter a word. My feeble struggles were like an ant trying to shake a tree under his grip. As my vision blurred and death approached, I seemed to instinctively draw the dagger from my sleeve and pierce the tyrant's palm. He let go of me. I collapsed on the ground, coughing and gasping for air, seeing his hands covered in blood. I finally realized what I had done and felt death looming over me, but before panic or fear could set in, I passed out from prolonged suffocation, my head spinning. 17. I thought even if I woke up again, it would surely be in a dark dungeon, yet when I opened my eyes, what greeted me was a dimly lit palace. I climbed off the couch and saw several acupuncture needles still embedded in my arm. Evidently, a royal physician had examined me. I pulled out the needles and stepped out of the small alcove, only to find myself still in the hall of diligent governance. The grand hall was eerily silent, its disarray left unattended. The candles in the corners had burned halfway, their wax slowly dripping. A wisp of sandalwood incense drifted from the burner, dispersing through the vast, dimly lit space, yet failing to mask the lingering scent of blood. The tyrant sat lazily on the steps with his back to me, idly twirling that dagger in his hand. His own wounds remained unbandaged, blood soaking his robes. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure whether to advance or retreat, as if he had eyes on the back of his head. He asked indifferently, awake. I hurried to kneel before him and plead guilty, saying that stabbing him was my fault alone, and I was willing to be punished. This matter had nothing to do with the Liu family. He didn't respond. After a long while, I cautiously raised my head to look at him. The tyrant remained silent, quietly holding that dagger. His silhouette was haloed by faint candlelight, his lashes slightly lowered, his eyes reflecting the dim candle flames, cold, weary, and exuding an inescapable world weariness. For a fleeting moment, I suddenly felt that he was actually an extraordinarily handsome man. True beauty lies in the bones. His face might be ugly, but his bone structure remained peerlessly beautiful, delivering a slow dawning awe. He waited until I finished speaking before saying, "This is the knife that Sherwu secretly gave you. One of the birthday gifts my mother gave me when I turned 16, a perfectly calm sentence. Yet it exploded like thunder in my mind. 18, when I was at my wit's end, someone once pulled me back. That person, I will never forget, but to my shame, I didn't recognize him. I never imagined that this emperor before me, who looked like a demon and was cruel and unkind, was the same jade-faced, noble and kind-hearted youth from back then. I finally understood why, when I was pushed and fell before him that day, he could instantly see through that I wasn't Liu Xian. I couldn't recognize him. Yet he still remembered me. He remembered my name was Ateo. Ateo was a fatherless child, protecting his mentally ill mother all alone. This was what Sherwu had once told him, a fatherless little beggar who nearly starved to death on the streets searching for his mad mother. So pitiful, so wretched. How could he possibly be the same person as Liu Xian, the pampered young master of the Liu family? By now, he must have thoroughly uncovered all the details about me. I thought he would take the dagger back. After all, it was something connected to someone from his past. The gleaming short blade in his hand gave me the illusion of things coming full circle and returning to their rightful owner. Yet the dark-haired emperor in black robes took that somewhat aged dagger, wiped it clean on an unstained corner of his garment, removing his own bloodstains, and handed it to me. His voice was soft and faint. "This dagger, its hilt polished smooth, you must have carried it with you at all times, treasuring and cherishing it deeply, since it was gifted to you. It is yours, keep it safe." Learning that this was a birthday gift from his mother long ago, I hesitated to accept it. After studying me for a moment, he finally stood up, approached me slowly, pulled me to my feet, and placed the sheathed dagger in my palm, closing my slender fingers around it. Completely different from the frenzied and violent demeanor just moments ago, his hand was slender, pale, and ice-cold. It was the first time I had been so close to him, close enough to catch the faint sandalwood scent beneath the blood on him. The tyrant, who should have been ruthless and bloodthirsty, told me, "Hold on to it. Things you cherish should be treated with care." His mother had given him countless birthday gifts over the years, and to him, this was just one insignificant item among them, but to me, it represented something uniquely irreplaceable. So he left it with me. "Go back," he said, turning to pick up the blood-stained longsword from the ground. He cut a piece of cloth and carefully wiped the blade, showing no intention of holding me accountable for stabbing him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have called the imperial physician for me. Yet he seemed equally unconcerned about the wound on his own hand, still oozing blood, though the imperial physician had just been here. He hadn't asked for treatment and hadn't shown the slightest hint of pain throughout. I gathered my courage to remind him. The tyrant paused his hand, then casually tore a cloth strip to bandage himself roughly. I was puzzled but had no reason to probe further. Step by step, I walked away, circling around the screen, then mustered my courage again to turn back and cautiously asked him, "Your Majesty, Then, where has that 15th brother gone, having stayed in the palace for so long? I had never seen him, that once inseparable, closest subordinate who always followed the young master. The tyrant stopped, not looking at me, his eyes downcast, expressionless, his voice calm and indifferent. Dead, he died very, very close to him, trampled by horses until his remains were mutilated, while he remained completely unaware at the time. I don't remember how I walked out of the hall of diligent governance. Deep in autumn, the plants along the path began to wither. Crimson leaves scattering chaotically, some caught in the breeze to tangle in my skirt's hem, others embedded in the lake's surface by moonlight. At that time I didn't yet know his name was Gulu. Only later did I learn that Gulu's Western inspection tour had Luoqing as its final destination. It followed the exact route of his exile years ago. Along the way, he executed countless people, even slaughtering the military camp outside Luoqing. The world called him temperamental and bloodthirsty. But only the dead knew whether they were truly innocent. In Luoqing, Gulu endured relentless humiliation and suppression, constant surveillance, verbal abuse, physical beatings. His legs were broken, forcing him to limp. Beggars tormented him nearly to death. Rats gnawed at his face, disfiguring him. The jade pendant left by his mother was stolen. He survived by feigning madness to lower his enemy's guard, until he overheard news of 15's death being laughed about as casual gossip. Amidst the turmoil at the border, Luoqing was nearly overrun. Taking advantage of the chaos, Gulu escaped, rescuing his remaining scattered former subordinates. Filled with hatred, he headed straight for the capital, determined to seek revenge by perishing together with his enemies. The group dared not take the main roads, traversing mountains and valleys instead. At their most desperate and starving moment, they encountered an elderly man pierced by an arrow, whom someone recognized as a renowned miracle doctor from the area. The miracle doctor had been offering free medical services in Luoqing when war broke out. While fleeing, he was struck by a stray arrow and now lay on the brink of death. By then, Gulu had grown numb and cold-hearted, with little kindness left in him, yet the man was elderly and a healer who had saved countless lives. Gulu gazed at the old man for a long moment before ultimately deciding to take him along. The group pulled their last scraps of food and medicine to revive him. After waking up, the divine physician expressed his gratitude to them, then drugged everyone with a pot of soup and took them back to his mansion. His estate was lush with vibrant flowers and fruits, beneath which lay piles upon piles of skeletal remains. The widely renowned philanthropist was actually a madman who experimented on humans with drugs. He cared nothing for human lives or anything else, only whether his concocted prescriptions were the best. He believed Gulu's resilient temperament made her ideal for drug trials, as she wouldn't die easily and disrupt his research. Gulu and her former subordinates became the divine physician's test subjects. One by one, her companions perished or took their own lives under inhuman torture, until only Gulu remained, locked in a pitch-black cell infested with venomous insects, snakes, and rats. Days passed like years, and Gulu endured for several more. Each time the divine physician thought he would die and prepared to bury him, the silent youth would pull through again, as if living solely for the sake of survival, persisting even when life was worse than death. After years of endurance, Gulu familiarized himself with the estate's layout, gained the divine physician's trust, and ultimately escaped alive. Once outside, he found the world drastically changed. War raged everywhere, leaving devastation in its wake. The old emperor in the distant palace neglected governance. Consort Sun still failed to secure the empress's position. Princeton remained a dissolute figure unable to command respect. Regional lords grew rebellious, court officials and prefectures busied themselves with pledging allegiances, and the common people rose in constant revolt. Gulu rallied former generals once promoted by the late Grand General Yi. Amid the chaos, he waged war to sustain war, expanding his influence step by step until he fought his way back to the capital. Consort Sun and Princeton were both shot dead by his own hand. Carrying their severed heads, he strode into the emperor's bedchamber, only to see his once majestic father shriveled into a gaunt old man, trembling as he penned the abdication edict. The old emperor showed no trace of anger at being forced to abdicate. Instead, his eyes brimmed with pride as he gazed at him. Good, liar, truly my liar. Amidst the chaos where heroes vie for supremacy, you alone have the strength to pacify the realm. But when Gulayer, silhouetted against the light, drew near, revealing the horrifying scars on his face, the stench of blood clinging to his robes, and eyes as cold and lifeless as frozen spring water, the old emperor froze. How could you have become like this? He seemed to be murmuring more to himself, when Gulu led his troops into the imperial palace. The old emperor instead ordered the defenses to be withdrawn, offering no resistance. He simply waited on the dragon throne for Gulu's arrival, and then Gulu finally learned the reason. It turned out that his mother had not actually committed suicide in the cold palace after all. Indeed, how could a woman who had once ridden into battle alongside her father be the type to take her own life at the first sign of trouble? That was merely the official story. Empress Shi had actually been imprisoned in a residence outside the capital. For reasons unknown, the old emperor couldn't bring himself to kill her and would occasionally visit her. With her wings clipped, Empress Shi was confined to that residence for many years. Later, when Consort's son found out, she often sent people to torment her. This caused Empress Shi to fall ill, and with her overwhelming sorrow, a minor illness dragged on until it became serious, ultimately leading to her death in that small residence she could never escape. After her death, the old emperor seemed to suddenly realize his love for her and abruptly recognized the wickedness of Consort's son. He began to regretting the harm he had caused to his wife who once adored him wholeheartedly, resulting in her harboring only hatred for him in her final years. He blamed Consort's son for Empress Xi's death, grew to despise her, and repeatedly postponed his promises to make her empress and crown prince and as the heir. Filled with remorse, he abandoned himself to despair, neglecting state affairs and spending his days in drunken stupor within the palace chambers Empress Shi once inhabited. Later, as circumstances shifted dramatically, when Gulu threw the severed heads of his beloved consort and prince at his feet, the old emperor remained indifferent. He voluntarily abdicated, expressing his wish to be buried alongside his departed wife in the imperial mausoleum. While the old emperor continued voicing his burial wish, he failed to notice Gulu's reddened eyes and murderous aura radiating from his entire being. It turns out Empress Shi didn't commit suicide in the cold palace back then. She died of illness and seclusion. The time of her death coincided precisely with when Gulu, as a human test subject, was enduring torture and about to escape his living hell. Just a little more back then and he could have seen his mother one last time. If only he had escaped faster, if only he had fought his way back to the capital sooner, he could have saved his mother. Gulu let out a derisive laugh as he swung his blade, severing his biological father's head exactly like how those other two had died. Then his corpse was thrown out to be whipped and fed to dogs. While Empress Shi was reburied in the Yi family ancestral graves, Gulu killed many people that day, bathing the entire imperial city in blood, coupled with patricide and fratricide. His methods were cruel and reckless. Even though he had the late emperor's abdication edict and ascended the throne legitimately, the reputation of a tyrant inevitably spread. His previous leg injury had long been treated, but because it was treated too late, it left sequelae. When the weather turned cold, he would suffer waves of severe pain. Gulu was indeed a tyrant who treated human lives as worthless, especially when people scorned his hideous face or when the old injury in his leg throbbed with pain. In his foul moods, he became even more cruel and bloodthirsty. No one noticed that whenever he flew into a murderous rage, his state was abnormal, like a beast that had lost its reason. Consumed only by slaughter and malice, that was due to the lingering poison in his body. Gulu was used as a medicinal test subject and forced to ingest all sorts of chaotic drugs. The mixed toxins became deeply entrenched, flaring up unpredictably and, in severe cases, even affecting his sanity. Gulu knew this, yet he deliberately neglected himself. All his enemies are dead, and so are his loved ones. He lingers in this world like a wandering spirit, without purpose or anchor. He knew excessive cruelty would eventually backfire. Many things could have been resolved gently, but he didn't care. He indulged in his brutality and slaughter, for he neither loved his subjects nor himself. When he fell to rock bottom, those he had saved betrayed him, and those who had saved him also harmed him. Everyone trampled upon him. He had witnessed too much of humanity's ugliness, and all people and matters filled him with weariness. He sat upon the highest throne of the mortal world, holding the imperial seal that commanded wind and rain, clad in a dragon robe embroidered by master artisans. Yet his face was ruined, his body beneath the dragon robe scarred all over, long eroded by medicinal toxins like rotting wood. His very core was shattered, broken beyond repair. Everyone fears the tyrant. None remember he was once the beloved crown prince adored by all. That night, walking back from the hall of diligent governance, I dreamed of my younger self, and of Gulu and Sherwu in their youth. The youth pushed away the mischievous white horse chewing his hair, standing tall with noble grace, his gaze never leaving the pitiful, disheveled little beggar. He said, "Don't hit her." He also said, "Sherwu, go help her find it." Then he got on the carriage and disappeared into the crowd. Sherwu loved to laugh and was as kind as an older brother. He replied to his colleague with a smile, "Of course I'm scared. That's why I'm running away." Having said that, they ran off, chasing each other, and soon disappeared into the crowd. From then on, as the world changed and years passed silently, the radiant Gulu and the lively 15 were never seen again. Like fallen leaves caught in a skirt's hem, sinking into the lake, they vanished without a trace under the moonlight's witness. 19. It seems that when all things wither at the end of autumn, the sky is always overcast. Returning from the hall of diligent governance, I suddenly felt an unbearable coldness, a chill that seeped deep into my bones, so I took out the gray rabbit from the corner and curled up with it to sleep. The rabbit was very well behaved, though clearly uncomfortable. It didn't struggle, bringing me faint threads of warmth. The next day, I went straight to Lu Shirong and asked her bluntly, "It was you who bribed the palace servants in Lu Xian's hall to force me before the enraged emperor, wasn't it?" She had no time to put on her usual gentle smile. My question froze her expression, and she looked at me in surprise. "How did you know?" Not denying it means admitting it. The chill of late autumn rose in waves again, and I felt my heart soaked in coldness. It was the tyrant who had someone investigate and find out. The old eunuch told me that His Majesty indeed suffers from a persistent headache ailment. During episodes, he becomes violent and uncontrollable. Those sent to deliver medicine never return, so the palace has always arranged for condemned prisoners to bear this misfortune. No palace consort willingly approaches His Majesty, except for those twin beauties the other day who attempted to assassinate him. Someone took advantage of my lack of personnel in the palace and my isolation, bribing the palace servants in Lu Xian's quarters to intercept that day's medicine, intending to send me to my death and then frame Lu Xian. This person is Lu Shirong, the very Lu Shirong I once trusted and was grateful to, gentle and kind-hearted. I've always been grateful that she treated me as a true younger sister, as family. The old eunuch asked how to deal with Lu Shirong, as I was still embroidering warm sleeves for her winter. Distracted, the needle pricked my finger, the sting spread. But I was accustomed to it. I smeared the blood on the intricate pattern I'd spent countless days and nights embroidering, personally destroying those lifelike blooming flowers. I didn't answer. I wanted to ask her myself. Lu Shirong admitted without hesitation. She no longer pretended closeness, turning hostile on the spot. With a mocking laugh, she tore apart the handkerchief she'd once begged me to embroider for her. "Yes, I've been deceiving you all along. Who cares about your worthless trinkets?" When Lu Shirong was very young, her birth mother was driven out of the mansion. Her stepmother treated her neither well nor poorly, paying little attention to her. As for her father, he only showed rare concern when she excelled in her studies and earned praise from her tutor, or when she performed talents at banquets and won applause from the crowd. So from a young age, she diligently studied music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, excelling in all. But it was then she realized that her frail and sickly half-sister, who lived in the countryside manor, learned nothing and could do nothing, yet still received their father's doting affection. Occasionally, her half-sister would return to the Prime Minister Lu's mansion for extended stays. She detested Lu Shirong and often bullied her. Even when their father knew, he would only tell Lu Shirong to be more tolerant of her younger sister. Lu Shirong also despised Lu Xian, but she never showed it. Having grown up in the complex household without her birth mother by her side, she relied entirely on herself and learned to disguise her true feelings early on. To outsiders, she always appeared gentle, virtuous, and completely non-threatening. She had long wanted to deal with Lu Xian, and this entry into the palace gave her the opportunity. Away from her father and stepmother's watchful eyes, she had many ways to make trouble for Lu Xian. In her eyes, I was merely a convenient tool in one of her schemes to cause trouble. In her plan, showing me the slightest kindness would allow her to feign deep affection, then frame Lu Xian for my death. As someone who deeply cared for me, she could righteously demand severe punishment for Lu Xian in my name, while also making my father see Lu Xian's viciousness and turn against her. What she didn't anticipate was that I could emerge unscathed from the hall of diligent governance. In a way, Lu Shirong was the one who resembled Lu Qingshi the most, hypocritical and scheming. As for Lu Xian, she resembles my mother in her youth, spoiled from childhood, willful, foolish, vicious, and capricious. The palace maids tried to restrain Lu Shirong, but she broke free, stomped fiercely on the torn handkerchiefs, and laughed hysterically at me, tears streaming down her face. "Lu Tian, oh Lu Tian, you're just a pawn. No one cares about you or your worthless things, from start to finish. You've been nothing but an unwanted wretch." After she was taken away, I quietly walked over, picked up the trampled and tattered handkerchief, buried it under an unnamed tree in the courtyard, and was then hurried onto the carriage for my home visit. Every year, the palace arranges for concubines and palace maids to return home before the new year to visit their families. Lu Xian and I shared a carriage on the way back. She clearly disliked me, keeping a sullen face the entire journey as she gazed out the window, yet upon reaching our destination, her expression involuntarily brightened with joy. She rushed out of the carriage and threw herself into Madame Lu's arms, like a fledgling nestling close to its mother, affectionately cooing and clinging. Both Madame Lu and Lu Qingshi watched her with tender amusement, teasing her for never growing up. I stood alone in the cold wind for what felt like an eternity before they finally finished their affectionate chatter. It was only then that Lu Qingshi remembered my existence, turning to look at me with a furrowed brow. Lu Tian, aren't you going to greet your mother? He was referring to Madame Lu, the woman I was only permitted to address as mother in name. I stepped forward to pay my respects to Madame Lu. Her attitude was neither warm nor cold as she took off the pure gold 100 blessings bracelet from her wrist and gave it to me, a common courtesy gesture from elders of great families when meeting younger generations. Lu Xian went to Madame Lu's courtyard, while Lu Qingshi took me to the study to inquire about the details of my visit to the diligence hall that day. He showed no concern for the roles Lu Shirong and Lu Xian played in the matter. Focusing solely on why the tyrant hadn't killed me, I gave vague responses to his questions. After pacing around the study for a while, he suddenly stopped before me, studied my face intently, and concluded, "My child, with such striking beauty, perhaps that person truly took a fancy to you." He took out several packets of poison and demanded that I gain the tyrant's favor, then slip it into his food. "This poison is colorless and tasteless, death comes with the first bite. The world has suffered under this tyrant for too long, both court and commoners praise my virtue. If I were to take the throne, it would benefit us all, you, me, and the people. Kill him, and when I claim the empire, you'll be the most honored princess, your mother a revered empress dowager, a lifetime of glory and wealth awaits." Seeing me stunned, he raised his hand to pat my head like any ordinary father would, but between us, his gesture was stiff, and I instinctively shrank back. He awkwardly lowered his hand. "Your mother hasn't seen you in so long, go visit her." Lured by wealth and glory, threatened by my mother's life, he openly displayed his ambitions before me, unafraid of me leaking secrets because he held my weakness in his grasp. I took those packets of poison, obediently withdrew, and followed the servant to my mother's courtyard. Halfway through the lush foliage, I quietly slipped away, retracing the memorized path back to Lu Qingshi's study. Standing by the study's rear window, I saw my personal palace maid reporting my palace activities to Lu Qingshi. He sighed. "At first I thought she was a useless discard, nearly killed her, fortunately failed, twice now. She survived in his hands." To him, Lu Tian must be special. My pupils dilated involuntarily, as if I suddenly understood something. So that day, it was this palace maid arranged by Lu Qingshi who pushed me out of the crowd. He wanted me to be executed for offending His Majesty as soon as I entered the palace, so no one would discover he had replaced Lu Xian with me. My biological father never intended to let me live from the very first moment he saw me in Luoqing, and now, he's still scheming to send me to my death to fulfill his ambitions. I couldn't quite describe the feeling in my heart. In a daze, I left, breaking off 2 newly bloomed wintersweet branches before encountering the maidservant who had come looking for me nearby. I feigned delight. I caught the scent of wintersweet along the way and wanted to pick some branches for mother. I didn't expect to get lost. Fortunately, you found me. The sprawling mansion with its winding corridors was inherently confusing to navigate. Moreover, she had likely received instructions from Lu Qingshi to prevent me from remembering the study's location, deliberately taking me on a roundabout route when we left. Getting lost would have been perfectly natural. What she didn't anticipate was my ability to memorize the entire path and even find shortcuts. The maidservant clearly believed me, her suspicions dissipating as she continued leading me to the courtyard where mother resided. "It's been a long time since we last met, and mother doesn't seem as mad as before. She even specially made lotus seed and lily soup to welcome me home, imitating the manner of an ordinary mother by asking about my recent life." When the conversation lapsed into silence between us, she clumsily tried to tell me stories like she used to. After a long while, she probably finally realized the estrangement and awkwardness between us, and grew quiet as well. After a pause, she straightened up and finally voiced her greatest concern. "Lu Tian, are you favored in the palace?" My hand holding the spoon paused, and then I said, "No one in the palace is favored." Mother sat down beside me, forcing me to look at her, and asked, "You've already met Lu Qingshi, haven't you?" I didn't know what she was getting at and hesitated before answering. Yes, I have. My mother became inexplicably agitated, her eyes filled with lucid madness and hatred. Remember, he is not your father. He is the enemy of both you and your mother. Lu Tian, you are my flesh and blood, and I know you well. You're a clever child, inheriting both my looks and Lu Qingshi's. Beauty and intellect are weapons with invisible blades. Now you have the chance to wield them. Get close to the emperor, vie for his favor, and find a way to have Lu Qingshi's entire clan executed. As she spoke, she changed her mind again, shaking her head and muttering to herself, no, this is too slow, far too slow. Suddenly struck by an idea, her eyes gleamed with intensity as she gripped my arm, her hatred laid bare. Wait, why don't you just seize the chance to stab him to death? Lu Tian, as long as he dies, your mother will finally be free. She schemed about how I could kill Lu Qingshi to avenge her, never once considering how I might escape unscathed, just like how Lu Qingshi sent me to poison the tyrant. Never once thought about it. My heart suddenly felt so uncomfortable, that indescribable discomfort growing increasingly clear, perhaps because I remained silent for too long. My mother finally glanced at me. In her eyes, I must have appeared wooden, head bowed low. Mindlessly stirring the soup with my spoon, clinking against the bowl without taking a single sip, she lost her patience, having long shed her earlier pretense of maternal affection, and glared at me coldly, demanding an answer. Lu Tian, will you go and avenge your mother or not? I opened my mouth, only to find no sound came out. After another moment of silence, I neither agreed nor refused, gently pushing the bowl of lotus seed and lily soup back toward her, speaking softly, Mother, do you remember, lotus seeds could kill me. I'm allergic to lotus seeds. Severe reactions have nearly cost me my life before. As a child when mother denied me food, starving once drove me to wade through winter waters for leftover lotus pods in the pond. After half a day in bone-chilling water, I barely gathered a handful of shriveled seeds. I savored each one carefully, only to writhe in agony that night, my body covered in dense red rashes. My mother feared I had contracted some contagious disease and drove me out of the house. When I was lying weakly in a pile of straw, barely alive, fortunately my aunt came by to deliver something and saw me. She carried me down the mountain overnight to find the village's barefoot doctor, who diagnosed me with having eaten something I was allergic to. A few more bites could have cost me my life. Since then, I've never eaten lotus seeds again, but every summer, I would do odd jobs for the owner of the lotus pond in exchange for imperfect lotus seed pods, which I'd take home and save to make soup. Because my mother loved sweet lotus seed soup, she said she understood me. I found this statement both laughable and heartbreaking. If she truly understood me, she wouldn't have cooked her favorite lotus seed soup just to pretend to welcome me. As I walked out through her rigid expression, opened the door and took deep breaths of fresh air. The suffocating feeling in my chest simply wouldn't ease. The evening brought a family banquet. Madame Lu sent someone to summon me to dine together. Nominally, I was Lu Qingshi's adopted daughter registered under Madame Lu's name, her daughter too. With Lu Shirong absent, Lu Xian sat with her parents. The family meal was informal, with both Lu Qingshi and Madame Lu constantly serving her favorite dishes. Gradually I realized the entire table was set with her preferences. Sitting alone at the end, that inexplicably familiar sense of not belonging washed over me again. Midway through the meal, Lu Xian suddenly grew upset. When Lu Qingshi asked what was wrong, she stared pointedly at me and said, "Our family is happily reunited. I dislike having some unwelcome outsider ruining the atmosphere." So halfway through dinner, Lu Qingshi asked me to step outside, saying the kitchen would prepare a separate meal for me, instead of heading to the kitchen as told. I left the estate and wandered aimlessly through the streets. As night just fell, the street market bustled with activity, lanterns hung high from eaves, crowds surged, and the clamor of vendors filled the air. With the lively atmosphere permeating in all directions, I saw a nursing baby in arms pestering parents to buy a sugar figurine, the parents helpless yet dotingly choosing the largest one for their child. A dumpling-selling granny was scolding her grandson for getting covered in mud after climbing to rob a bird's nest, then placing the rescued fledgling by the stove to keep it from freezing. A bride-to-be was selecting jewelry with her mother and sisters to prepare her dowry. An elderly woman supported her even older mother as they sat chatting with neighbors. Like a lonely wandering spirit, I moved through their liveliness. Gradually the night deepened. Shops along the street closed one after another, lights dimmed, pedestrians grew sparse, and as I walked on, someone stopped me. I looked up and realized I had unconsciously walked to a small gate outside the imperial palace. The prime minister's residence was actually very close to the palace. The guards stopped me. After a moment of hesitation, I asked them, Can a concubine who left the palace to visit her family return earlier than scheduled? The question left them speechless. It was always the palace concubines who were reluctant to leave when returning from home visits, complaining that the reunion time was too short. None had ever wanted to come back early. Someone left to seek instructions and returned with permission, saying I could enter. I turned to look at the palace maid following at a distance. Go report to my father. I'm returning to the palace first. Then I left her standing there uncomprehending as I stepped through the gate and slowly walked away. A light snow began to fall from the sky. Winter had arrived. Back in my own palace, I still slept restlessly, my hands and feet icy cold, my whole body chilled. Winter had come early this year, and the heating charcoal hadn't yet been distributed to all the palaces, leaving the entire building without a trace of warmth. In the middle of the night, I got up and instinctively grabbed the rabbit to hold, curling up in the icy quilt, snuggling for warmth. My mother never understood me. When we lived in the mountains, even in the coldest winters, I could wear thin clothes to wade into the river and catch fish, dig for pheasants hidden by foxes in the snow, climb steep mountains alone to chop firewood in the deep winter, and prepare New Year's goods like an adult. When the new year came, I couldn't bear to eat the meat heartily. Always saving the hard-earned meat for my mother and giving all the firewood I had painstakingly gathered to keep her warm, she was used to it, so she always thought I was naturally unafraid of the cold and never made me winter clothes like other mothers did for their children. She didn't know that I was actually very afraid of the cold, more so than most people, so I even had to hug the rabbit to keep warm while sleeping, just to peacefully sleep through the night. The lingering dull pain in my heart could also be temporarily forgotten. Lu Shirong was right. To them, I'm just a pawn. No one cares about me. From beginning to end, I've been nothing but an unwanted pitiful creature. The sister I thought treated me well had been scheming against me all along. My own father pushed me toward death time and again to achieve his goals. Even my mother, whom I depended on for survival, had only hatred in her eyes, urging me to trade my life for the enemy's. They all used me, then looked down on me. But no one wants me, while my rabbit is a wanted little bunny. Every day I beg the cook for leftover vegetable leaves, cut grass in the overgrown areas of the abandoned palace quarters, work hard to find food for it, build it a clean and warm little nest, and even tie a pretty bow on its damaged ear. I realized I had changed. I'd rather spend the whole day doing nothing but watching the little rabbit eat grass than stay with my mother any longer. When they all went home for family visits, I remained in the palace searching for fresh grass for the rabbit, until one day I returned to find it lying stiff on the ground, covered in blood. The pretty little bow was also soaked in bloodstains. Some of the concubines who had returned home were already back in their palaces. Someone's dog had bitten my rabbit to death and carried it far away. That night, heavy snow fell. I picked up the tattered and stiff rabbit, staggering step by step through the snow, only to stumble and fall into the soft snow. The dead rabbit in my hand rolled down the slope to the wax plum tree. The flowers were in full bloom, their fragrance refreshing the heart and mind. But I still feel so awful. My eyes burned, my nose tingled, and I pressed my lips tightly together, refusing to let the tears fall. The long-suppressed, suffocating, and dull pain tangled chaotically in my heart. Who made you feel so wronged? The man's deep, measured voice came through the wind and snow. I looked up and saw the tyrant standing under the winter-sweet tree, gazing at me in his luxurious sable coat. A eunuch held a palace lantern behind him while he himself held an umbrella. The swirling snowflakes drifted past his eyes into the warm amber glow. I numbly wiped my face, only to find my hand covered in frost and snow. There were no tears. I clearly wasn't crying. Why did he say I looked wronged? Do I look like I'm being wronged? I stared blankly at him again. Perhaps at this moment I should stand up and bow to the emperor, or find words to answer his question, but I remained frozen in the snow, ultimately saying and doing nothing, as if I had lost all vitality amidst the swirling blizzard. Fortunately, the tyrant didn't seem to mind either. With his slender, jade-like yet scar-covered hands, he picked up the stiff rabbit at his feet and called for a eunuch to fetch a shovel. When the eunuch returned and whispered something in his ear, the tyrant immediately understood what had happened. It's just a rabbit. If it's dead, we'll bury it. He pulled me up from the snow, chose a good spot under the winter-sweet tree, and lightly tapped the ground with his pale fingers. Bury it here. Just a rabbit. Is that all? I felt more and more like crying, my heart aching. Really just a rabbit. Is that all? No. It's not just a rabbit. It's my emotional anchor. In the past, I didn't need such anchors. Back then, it was just my mother and me living in the mountains. My life was extremely simple, and from childhood I'd only ever interacted with my mother. I used to be easily satisfied, though mother often beat and scolded me, always looking at me with cold eyes. on rare occasions when she was in good spirits, braiding my hair once or telling me a rather dull story, I'd be overjoyed, feeling immensely honored, but now, when she does the same things, I no longer feel that happiness, like someone who has lived an eternal night suddenly stepping into a normal world, witnessing the light people take for granted, only then realizing how profound the darkness truly was, when I was abruptly taken from the remote mountains and thrown into the bustling capital, encountering countless people and events, beholding sights I'd never imagined. I peered at the happiness of other families' children like a sewer rat gazing upward, when I raised rabbits, building them clean and warm nests, tying ribbons around their injured ears. Only then did I realize how pitiful that child who couldn't bear to undo her braided hair truly was, realizing you're unloved while also being afraid to love, the child who once adored his mother wholeheartedly, who would cross mountains and rivers to find her, risk his life for her, even enter the palace to be someone else's scapegoat, now dares not even stay by her side. Offering sincere love to someone who despises you means being hurt over and over again. That scruffy, ugly gray rabbit didn't just provide me with meager warmth on cold winter nights. In a way, it became a symbol of hope. Let me freely and recklessly bestow love. Lu Shirong schemed against me. Lu Xian drove me away. Lu Qingshi used me. Even my own mother hurt me. What died wasn't just a rabbit, but all the illusory, cold warmth in my life. 20. The tyrant personally dug a pit with a shovel, motioned for me to place it inside, stared at me, and slowly, word by word, said to me once again, Tao, it's just a rabbit. He said he could easily compensate me with another rabbit to comfort me. The most beautiful rabbit in the world could be rushed to my side, but that probably wasn't what I wanted. He was right. I didn't want any other healthy, beautiful rabbits. None of them were my little bunny. The tyrant covered the soil, handed the shovel to an attendant, flicked snow off a nearby wintersweet branch, and snapped it off. That night, he took me to where the rabbit was buried and shaped a snow rabbit in its likeness, adorning the snow rabbit's incomplete ear with the broken wintersweet. With the remaining branch, he drew 2 symbols on the ground. Gu Lu, my name, he said. I watched with partial understanding. Suddenly, I felt an inexplicable regret. I never attended school and couldn't recognize those 2 characters, so I could only try my best to memorize them as intricate patterns. Yet after a night's sleep, those patterns became blurred in my memory. But even in my next life, I might never forget the words Gu Lu said to me under the wintersweet tree, standing in the swirling snow, with his usual light, almost weary tone. Only much later did I gradually come to understand their meaning. It was just a rabbit, no different from the millions of other rabbits in the world. It was the love I poured into it that made it special among those millions of rabbits. When the rabbit died, the love and affection I should have received from family, which I had projected onto it, had nowhere to go. That day, I was so helpless and aggrieved, sad and disheveled. Gu Lu told me that perhaps I should treat myself as my own little rabbit to care for. Shower yourself with boundless love, always steadfastly adore yourself. So there's no need to crave the meager kindness others might offer. You'll never be unwanted, because you'll never abandon yourself. Always take yourself as the anchor to stand firm in this world, full, resilient, fearless, composed. 21. From that fluttering snowfall in my past life, time seemed to accelerate. With the world changing unpredictably and swiftly, Gu Lu unusually intervened in palace affairs, taking the phoenix seal from the highest-ranking consort Lu and placing it in my hands. While Lu Xian herself was indifferent, others were thrown into an uproar. No wonder they gossiped behind my back. My rank hadn't been elevated, remaining at an unremarkable mid-level, yet I held the phoenix seal. It was bizarre and out of place, holding an object symbolizing power in my hands. Indeed, no one dared to bully me openly anymore. As I passed through the courtyard, Wei Qingyu called out to me from across the way, leaning against the doorframe with arms crossed. She said, I heard Lu Xian gave you the phoenix seal. I've never seen that thing before. Can you show it to me? I looked at her and invited her inside to warm a pot of tea together. She examined the phoenix seal with admiration. What a beautiful piece of jade. I heard Lu Xian was once deeply fond of Gu Jin, raised since childhood to meet the standards of an empress. Who would have thought that one day she'd desperately beg to hand that imperial seal to someone else? She seemed lost in old memories, unable to help sighing. I didn't know who Gu Jin was, but guessed he must be the former prince of An who'd long since died by Gu Lu's sword. Wei Qingyu downed the tea she'd been roasting for ages in one gulp. Before leaving, she looked at me meaningfully and pointedly remarked, Lu Tian, if you have a choice, I suggest you don't interact too much with His Majesty. I grabbed her sleeve, picked up the teapot, then deliberately let it slip and shatter, using the pretense to send everyone out searching for new tea set. When we were finally alone, I released her sleeve and met her gaze. You could stand to speak more clearly. Wei Qingyu sighed. Lu Tian, I'm doing this for your own good. She said I actually have no survival skills in this imperial palace. People worry not about scarcity but about inequality, such as human nature. And it's the same everywhere. Previously I lived relatively peacefully here because I was inconspicuous and had no conflicts of interest with others. But now that I stand out from the crowd, I'll likely become the target of public criticism, facing both open attacks and hidden schemes that are hard to avoid or guard against, she said. Lu Tian, you're highly perceptive, but what does that matter? You simply don't have the opportunity to grow. You have no family to rely on, no followers. No sources of information, you can't even read or write, yet they all come from great families, carefully cultivated since childhood in environments full of overt and covert struggles. His Majesty isn't a good man, he won't protect you, even if he temporarily shields you out of novelty. An emperor's novelty never lasts long, he won't protect you for life. Moreover, your Majesty's actions are far too reckless and arbitrary, it's unlikely to end well, and I don't want to see you implicated. Criticizing the sovereign, if Wei Qingyu's words were to spread, it would mean beheading, yet she doesn't fear that I might betray her. I didn't respond to her, I didn't know how to respond. She wasn't wrong, life is already hard enough for me, becoming a thorn in the side of certain people in the palace would only make it harder. That's how it was at the Plum Blossom Banquet, palace consorts and noblewomen gathered together. Braving the bitter cold winds amidst the frozen snowfields to admire flowers and snow, calling it refined elegance, they still composed poetry, played the qin, painted, and discussed boudoir amusements into which I couldn't interject a single word. After laughing, the crowd inexplicably grew melancholic, saying plum blossoms could drift beyond the red walls while they remained trapped behind palace walls their entire lives. A mere few feet of palace walls have confined countless women's entire lives, someone lamented, casting a pall over the gathering. Only I was truly concentrating on gazing at the treetops, intending to pick the most beautiful branches to break off and place by my bedside. Perhaps I wasn't melancholic enough, standing out like a sore thumb, or maybe my every move had already been noticed, as someone asked me, "Why haven't you spoken? Have you thought of some fine phrases, composing some poetry?" The crowd's attention thus turned to me, clamoring that since everyone else had composed verses, only I remained, and insisted I too create a poem to be compiled into a poetry collection, while conveniently putting me on the spot. A daughter from the Prime Minister Lu's household must be exceptionally talented. You should recite a poem properly to outshine that Fong family's so-called #1 talented lady of the capital. Someone joked, and the mentioned Fong family's legitimate daughter laughed along. This was clearly deliberate provocation. If Wei Qingyu were here, she would help me out of this predicament, but she happened to be absent. I felt utterly at a loss, completely unskilled in such refined matters as composing poetry. Their expressions grew subtly complex, each revealing different thoughts. The more blunt among them even laughed outright. Just an adopted daughter of the Lu family, who knows from what backwater she was picked up, can't even recognize a single character the size of a peck measure. You can't turn a sparrow on a branch into a phoenix. How could you possibly expect her to compete with the #1 talented lady? Undisguised mockery and contempt. It felt like having an innate scar publicly pointed out and mocked. I couldn't help but feel humiliated. It wasn't until the belated arrival of Lu Xian broke the awkward silence that I could finally leave. She was also a daughter of the Lu family, though not entirely illiterate. Her scholarly achievements were far from impressive, constantly being compared unfavorably to that so-called capital's top talented lady. Hearing those remarks upon arrival inexplicably struck a nerve. She gathered all the poems and paintings created by the group and tossed them wholesale into the furnace flames, sparking heated arguments among them. For the first time, the traditionally grand plum blossom banquet ended abruptly in a farce. After learning of the incident, Gulu summoned me. He seemed faintly amused, the corners of his thin lips curling in evident delight, and even raised me up before I could kneel in greeting. He asked why I hadn't followed Lu Xian's example by throwing all their verses and paintings into the fire. I looked at him with mild surprise. Never having imagined I could be as free-spirited as Lu Xian. She has the confidence, I don't. Gulu draped his outer garment, seemingly preparing to go out. He stood still as the palace attendants adjusted his attire, tilting his head slightly to look at me. Don't you have a large imperial seal? It's quite heavy, perfect for use as a brick. If anyone provokes you, just smash it on their head, no matter who it is. They'd only dare to seethe in silence. He took a warming pan from the eunuch's hands and pressed it into mine, without even looking at his face, just observing his unhurried demeanor, so refined and elegant, yet his spoken words revealed him to be a tyrant who treated human life as worthless. A casual remark, "You can just kill them if you want, I'll cover for you." I didn't dare reply hastily, keeping my head bowed as if lost in thought. The northern snow had just cleared, under a biting cold sky. A gust of wind sent snow fluttering down from the pines, cypresses, and winter plum trees outside the palace behind him. The bed warmer was so cozy, it warmed me to the core of my heart. 22, Gulu said, "Accompany me for a walk outside." I followed closely behind him, passing through the heavily guarded gate tower, watching as he strolled leisurely through the snow, eventually stopping at the outermost wall of the imperial palace. In the distance, one could see the snow-covered rooftops of countless households in the capital, densely packed and scattered like stars. He asked me, today when those concubines lamented their trapped lives before the low wall, while I remained silent all along, what was I thinking in my heart? I realized he actually knew everything happening in the palace like the back of his hand. If there was something he didn't know, it was most likely because he couldn't be bothered to care or was too lazy to find out. Staring at the intricate embroidery on my shoes, I answered honestly, I was thinking about winter in Luoqing. Winters in Luoqing were extremely harsh, never enough food or warmth, but at least my mother and I had a roof over our heads. I'd seen too many displaced people fighting desperately over a single bowl of rice porridge. To them, the palace walls represent hardship and imprisonment, but to me, being able to eat my fill and stay warm inside the palace, where all the world's luxuries and pleasures are gathered without suffering hunger or cold, that's fortune enough. Those who go hungry don't have the luxury of overthinking. There are still countless people in this world spending their entire lives struggling to put down roots near the imperial city. Gulu's profound eyes gazed at me, seemingly unsurprised that I'd thought of Luoqing. He lowered his lashes, flicked the snow from his sleeve, and picked up a bow and arrow, sighing softly. Luoqing's winters are indeed cold. He taught me to draw the bow and shoot arrows, gesturing toward a bird in the sky. See that bird? It flies high and free, unbound, but you hold the arrow that can still bring it down. Gulu pulled me into his embrace, guiding my hands as we aimed at that swiftly passing bird in the vast, distant sky, a mere speck against the heavens. Draw the bow, knock the arrow, strike with unerring accuracy. A bird alights beneath the city walls. Do you see this wall beneath your feet, the highest in the imperial palace, heavily guarded, yet with the token in your hand, you can still step beyond it with ease. Gulu gazes at me. I think I understand now. The truth he wanted me to know. He personally took me down from the city tower and picked up the dead pigeon outside the palace gates, which had a letter tied to it. I thought he had just randomly chosen prey in conversation. But unexpectedly he had also intercepted someone's secret message. I couldn't understand it, so Gulu read it to me word by word. The general meaning was that someone was planning to assassinate him, having schemed for a long time. Several fake palace maids and eunuchs had infiltrated his bedchamber, only to find that the emperor, who was usually there, had disappeared. They immediately sent a message to their accomplices outside the palace to discuss countermeasures. Being accustomed to assassination attempts, Gulu took it in stride. He casually arranged for his subordinates to find another carrier pigeon, sent their message back, uncovered the mastermind, and then apprehended all the participants both inside and outside the palace. During those days, many more people died in the palace one after another, leaving everyone in fear for their lives. From that day on, Gulu made me go to the Hall of Diligent Governance every day to grind ink for him. Treading over frozen bloodstains, I no longer felt afraid. Grinding ink didn't actually take much time. During most of the remaining hours, when Gulu was at leisure, he personally taught me to recognize characters, one by one, had me copy from calligraphy models he selected, and arranged for venerable old ministers to tutor me in recitation. It dawned on me belatedly that he was actually teaching me to read and write. Others mocked my illiteracy. Of course he could have banished them all to the cold palace. But what would that achieve? Perhaps no one would dare mention it again, but in their hearts, they'd still look down on me with contempt. That's how it is, and it's not wrong. So I studied very diligently. With a decade less accumulation than others, I had to work harder than anyone. The first character I learned was Gu, and the second was Lu, Gulu, not the name Gulu memorized as a mere pattern, but stroke by stroke, the name I wrote with my own hands. The old minister was initially very resistant, even disgusted at the sight of me. He believed the emperor was using him to please a woman in the harem, utterly demeaning scholarly dignity. Later, seeing my diligence and sincerity, he gradually changed his opinion of me. Eventually, he began praising my intelligence, regretting not having met me sooner to take me as his student. He said it was a pity. Now I could only spend my life confined in the harem, vying for favor and stirring jealousy. I could only helplessly respond, saying there was no vying for favor or stirring jealousy. Had he met me earlier when I was still a little beggar, or a girl in the mountains wearing thin, tattered clothes even in winter, he wouldn't have noticed me at all. It was Gulu who saw me in the mud, so I could be seen by the old man, and by many others. The imperial palace is not a cage, not meant to confine anyone. How could a mere low wall trap anyone? It's just high enough to climb over with a ladder. What trapped them was the very families they relied upon, the tangled web of interests, the wealth and glory, their limited perspectives, their thoughts, and their hearts. What trapped them was themselves. Because they relied on their families to gain status, they also had to represent their families in seeking benefits within the palace. Because they enjoyed the palace's wealth and luxury, free from want, they also had to abide by its rules, seeking permission for every move. Because they gained some things, they inevitably lost others. Even if they hadn't entered the palace but married into ordinary official families, they would still be bound by these same shackles. The palace walls might vanish, but the high walls of interest would forever stand. We're all just pawns on the chessboard. What right do we have to speak of freedom, no matter how far we walk or how high we fly, with just a flick of the player's hand or the release of the archer's arrow? Our fates rise and fall at the whim of others. Those who dwell in the depths of the palace, emperors, royal heirs, empress dowagers, would never feel themselves imprisoned. They are the ones who move the pieces, draw the bows, and hold the tokens of power. First and foremost, I am a person, only then am I a woman, or a palace consort, or the adopted daughter of the Liu family. A person with a vast, free heart within them cannot be imprisoned by any wall in this world. A person with a token at their waist, a bow in hand, making decisive moves in the game, possessing status, power, and the intellect to wield it all. Why worry about not controlling their own destiny? Gulu was telling me, strive to take control of your own fate. 23. After I became proficient in archery, Gulu took me to a place, the military camp stationed outside the capital. The northern invaders provoked conflict, and after prolonged battles, the frontier has finally been pacified. The army returns with spoils of war, and by tradition, the emperor should bring his family and officials to bestow rewards and feast the troops. Normally, Gulu would ignore such ancestral rituals requiring the imperial harem's attendance, but this time, breaking precedent, he dutifully brought a large entourage. With more people comes greater complexity, a mix of fish and dragons, with undercurrents swirling beneath. Gulu summoned me to the forefront, into his own carriage. Along the journey, he showed me the scenery, visited temples to sample the monks' renowned vegetarian dishes, hunted with bows and crossbows on horseback, and roasted the game, wild deer and pheasants, over open fires. Then, through the smoke, he casually pointed out the hidden tensions among the long procession of carriages behind us, using it to pass the idle hours. After arriving at the location and completing the grand ceremony, Gulu took me to the slave-holding area, where there was a makeshift arena with blood and flesh flying everywhere. The defeated were all enslaved, crammed into small cages, waiting to be chosen to fight like beasts in the arena. The soldiers around had set up gambling tables, creating a rowdy atmosphere. Life on the battlefield was precarious and high pressure, and this was their rare chance to vent. Seeing the emperor suddenly arrive, they became extremely excited. Gulu stood on the high platform and watched for a while, seemingly unimpressed by the primitive fighting scene. With half-lidded eyes, he said to the military officer following behind, "Just repetitive brawling and slaughter. How dull." His tone was lazy. "How about something more interesting?" The interesting part meant replacing the lowly, ugly slaves in the arena with noble beauties to fight beasts. The scene would surely be tragically beautiful yet bloody, pitiful yet brutal, absurd and preposterous, yet everyone present secretly anticipated it. Gulu's gaze slowly swept over the harem women he had brought along. They instinctively paled with fear, until his eyes finally settled on one. With a slight raise of his hand, he signaled for her to be sent into the arena. The woman frantically cried for help, yet she was still thrown into the blood-stained arena. Facing her was a tall, robust dog that had been starved for days, its gaze ferocious. I recognized her. This was the same concubine who had recently led the public humiliation and mockery against me. It was also she who had deliberately set her dog on my beloved rabbit for amusement. Fully aware of how much the rabbit meant to me, this dog was likely the very one she had raised with her own hands. Unconsciously, I glanced at Gulu. He lounged lazily at the head of the hall, appearing somewhat disinterested. Noticing my gaze, he lifted his eyes to meet mine. Moments later, he ordered braziers to be placed across the half-enclosed terrace, seating me in the warmest spot beside him before whispering softly, "Cold." I hesitated and shook my head, but remained silent. Below, the noble-born consort was already covered in wounds from the ravenous hound's mauling, her agonized screams stripping away all dignity, leaving only utter wretchedness. Gulu had someone throw a knife inside. The woman snatched it up desperately and without hesitation stabbed at the head of the dog she'd once called her beloved, wild, uncontrolled strikes until the creature lay motionless. Even then, her reddened eyes kept stabbing until they dragged her away, her expression vacant and deranged. The crowd below was boiling with excitement, while the group of palace consorts on the high platform remained as silent as cicadas in winter, raised in the sheltered depths of the inner chambers. They had never witnessed such a spectacle, and some even fainted from fright. Amidst this silence, Gulu abruptly began clapping, her eyes smiling as she asked them, "Well, do you find it not thrilling enough?" They shook their heads in unison, hastily forcing stiff smiles to cheer along. Gulu, known for her unpredictable moods, now let her smile fade completely, her expression turning indifferent. "Indeed, this can hardly be called spectacular." His gaze drifted over the assembled ministers before settling on Lu Qingshi. The Prime Minister's earlier act of substituting one thing for another could indeed be considered masterful. Cold sweat broke out on Lu Qingshi's forehead. Gulu leisurely observed the Prime Minister's panicked expression for a while before dropping a bombshell. Why not have all three of the daughters he sent to the palace enter together and see who could survive the beast's jaws? The beasts referred to the half-grown brown bear from a small tributary state, currently caged nearby. A little further to the side, Lu Shirong, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, was brought over. Having spent this time in the cold palace, she must have suffered no small amount of hardship, appearing emaciated and haggard, her whole demeanor looking weary and lifeless. Lu Xian's eyes widened in shock. How dare they compare her to those lowly commoners below? Yet she didn't dare say anything. Her wide eyes fixed pleadingly on Lu Qingshi, filled with both grievance and indignation. Lu Qingshi wiped away cold sweat as he tentatively tried to dissuade them with a few words, though of course, it was to no avail. I, on the other hand, accepted this arrangement quite calmly. Gulu must have had his reasons for doing this. As I stood up to leave, a cold breeze blew, causing me to sneeze slightly, which made Gulu frown. He said with great seriousness that I was afraid of the cold. And perhaps I had caught a chill. It would be better to let my personal maid take my place and go down to the arena instead. The personal maid was scared out of her wits, trembling like a sieve as she was dragged away. The three of them were shoved into the arena. Lu Xian bit her lip in humiliation, pulling out the sturdiest hairpin from her bun and gripping it tightly. Lu Shirong remained silent, staring at the ground, while the maid wept throughout the entire ordeal. Gulu showed a hint of impatience in his expression. Too noisy. The palace attendants presented a bow and arrows before Lu Qingshi. As Gulu ordered him to deal with the noisy weeping maid, Lu Qingshi trembled as he shot the maid dead. Having spent years cultivating and painstakingly placing this pawn in the palace, only to destroy it with his own hands so easily, he must have felt profound regret. By now, the iron cage had opened. The beast, agitated by the scent of blood, charged toward the corpse, sniffed briefly, but showed little interest. Instead, it raised its head and fixed its gaze on the other two. Clearly, living prey stirred its hunting instincts more. Gulu seemed to find the scene finally somewhat intriguing. In high spirits, he casually handed Lu Qingshi a feathered arrow. "Chancellor, if given the chance, which of these two would you save? Or perhaps kill that bear and save them both?" Gulu's phoenix-like eyes, deep with thick inkiness, contained a malicious smile. A fierce beast presented as tribute from another nation, part of the state gifts. If it were killed immediately upon arrival, and by his hand no less, he could hardly avoid being accused of provoking discord between the two countries, jeopardizing his political career. Between his career and his own daughter, which would he choose? Lu Qingshi stiffly raised his bow. The two people ahead were already fleeing in panic. And Lu Xian's gaudy hairpin proved utterly useless. She cried out to Lu Qingshi for help, while Lu Shirong was also running, stealing hopeful glances at her father between desperate attempts to escape. There was no time left for hesitation. Lu Qingshi closed his eyes briefly, and when he reopened them, his decision was made. He aimed his arrow at Lu Shirong, piercing her calf with a single shot. Lu Shirong collapsed to the ground, and having been ahead moments before, she now fell behind. Lu Qingshi intended for her to block the brown bear's path, allowing Lu Xian to escape safely. Between his daughter and his political career, he chose the latter. Between his two daughters, he chose Lu Xian. As the abandoned one, Lu Shirong's hopeful eyes instantly turned lifeless. She laughed mockingly, unsurprised yet unable to suppress her hatred, transforming her resentment into the courage to survive. Gritting her teeth, she pulled the sharp arrow from her leg as the beast charged. She lunged forward and stabbed out one of its eyes, only to be swatted to the ground, coughing up blood and unable to rise while the brown bear publicly gnawed at her leg. She looks like she's about to die. I stood on the high platform for a long time. Finally, under Lu Qingshi's stunned gaze, I snatched the bow from his hands, knocked an arrow, drew the string, and shot through the bear's other eye with a single arrow. When I put down the bow, I realized my palms were sweaty. This was the most accurate shot I'd ever made. The completely blinded beast roared and rampaged wildly. Lu Shirong instinctively glanced at me, then snapped back to reality and ran desperately to escape. Gu Lu indulged my presumptuousness. When others accused me of overstepping, he didn't even bat an eye. A brutal and bloody farce finally came to an end. Lu Xian, frightened by the events, fell seriously ill upon returning home and thereafter lived in seclusion. Rarely venturing out, Lu Shirong was once again abandoned in the cold palace. As we crossed paths that day before parting, she called out to me, "Don't you resent me? Why did you save me? How come I never realized before that you're such a pushover?" Her tone was far from pleasant, habitually barbed toward everyone. I watched her standing in the wind and snow, clad in shabby winter clothes, her exposed skin covered in chilblains. My gaze was calm yet indifferent. If you were to bash your head against a tree trunk right now, I wouldn't save you. In that situation, I didn't want to become someone who could watch beasts devour a living person without feeling anything. There's nothing to resent. She has already received the punishment she deserved, so she's no longer worth keeping in my thoughts. Actually, my sense of hatred is quite dull. It's as if I've encountered too much suffering since childhood. And I've instinctively learned to protect myself by blocking out unpleasant things. I remember everyone who has bullied me, and I know I should seek revenge. But these things don't occupy my entire life, and the right opportunity is needed. I never expected that Gu Lu remembered each and every one of them. He was teaching those people a lesson on my behalf, while also showing me how to manipulate people's hearts and strike at their weak points. Later, winter gave way to spring, summer fireflies faded with autumn, and the years quietly turned. I have mastered excellent calligraphy and studied extensively, so I will no longer feel anxious about being mocked for lacking knowledge. Holding the Phoenix seal while not having a high enough rank indeed brings many troubles. Gu Lu won't solve them for me, but he will point me in the right direction, teaching me how to handle things when I occasionally feel lost. He gradually taught me how to establish myself in the treacherous center of power. If I can stand firm in such complex circumstances, then I'll be able to handle any situation or difficulty with ease in the future. I grew rapidly, slowly coming to understand his intentions. Wei Qingyu once said that I actually have no survival skills in this imperial palace, and Gu Lu cannot protect me forever. I never expected anyone to protect me indefinitely, so I didn't know how to respond at that time. Neither of us anticipated that Gu Lu would gradually teach me the skills to protect myself and stand firm in this world. Everyone is just a passerby in each other's lives. Some leave deeper imprints, while others leave fainter traces. No one can support another forever. The only one who can always stand up for you is the self that never gives up on itself, the self that controls its own destiny, the self with thoughts, abilities, and convictions. Gu Lu, who became a tyrant, was not a good man. He was ruthless, merciless, and capricious, but he has always treated me very, very well. Whether it was the past him or the present him, he was a tyrant to everyone else, but to me, he remained the white-clad youth of my memories. He is the demon to everyone else, but the deity to me alone. He taught me to love myself, gave me faith, and helped me grow. A broken and battered him transformed another me, who was suddenly thrown into the chaotic world. Outwardly strong but inwardly lost, insecure and timid, into a fulfilled and composed me. He buried my little rabbit and made a snow rabbit to comfort me. People keep pets not just to be loved, but also to give love. Gu Lu told me to treat myself as my own little rabbit to care for. Much later, on an ordinary day, a thought flashed through my mind, and only then did I suddenly realize, in a way, Ateo was also Gu Lu's little rabbit. I learned from Wei Qingyu's example and wrote letters to my family, but when the letters were finished, I suddenly realized there was no one to send them to. It seemed I didn't miss my mother as much as I thought, so, across the distance of 2 palaces, I sent letters to Gu Lu every day, rambling about trivial matters I encountered. In between reviewing memorials, Gu Lu would casually draw a little flower on my letters with a vermilion brush to acknowledge them. I embroidered protective talismans for him and Wei Qingyu. Wei Qingyu pinched the one with the dragon pattern and said with a hint of jealousy that the black one was embroidered more carefully. I ate her overly sweet pastries in summer, only to vomit and have diarrhea at night, then realized they contained lotus seeds. Wei Qingyu never used lotus seeds in desserts again. I also thought of my mother whom I hadn't seen for so long. See. I'm allergic to lotus seeds. This is actually very easy to remember. During Mid-Autumn Festival, I accidentally drank some alcohol and got utterly drunk. I only remember rushing to the Hall of Diligent Governance, then tripping over the threshold, and it seems I cried. When the winter snow filled the sky again, the palace put up New Year couplets. The bright red paper that used to bear classical allusions was now replaced with simple phrases: add fortune, add years, add wealth and treasures. Only later did I realize that after getting drunk, I had fallen and clung to Gulu's leg while crying, sobbing that I now understood. The character Tian means superfluous. To everyone, I had always been the superfluous one. After leaving the mountains, everyone called me Lu Tian. Even my mother pointed at me and scolded me, saying she would have been much happier had I never been born. Only Gulu always called me Atao. He never once called me Lu Tian, but he was telling me. The character Tian signifies adding blessings and years, wishing you peace and health year after year. During the New Year, the palace held a grand banquet where everyone was required to offer New Year's greetings to the emperor. Unsurprisingly, they all competed in literary talent, each trying to outdo the other with increasingly ornate phrases. When it was my turn, I carefully wrote on the blessing lantern, character by character, "May you live a long life, safe and sound year after year." A simple phrase, carried by thousands of lanterns, was released, floating, ascending into the vast night sky. Countless points of light converged into a brilliant galaxy. Gulu didn't disdain the simplicity of the blessing. Somehow, unbeknownst to me, after the night passed and countless lanterns fell scattered across the land, he managed to find and preserve mine. It was still winter back then. After the harsh winter comes the warmth of spring, with its vibrant blossoms. If time from my past life had frozen at that moment, even if not entirely perfect, how wonderful everything would have been. 24. I woke up from a long nightmare. The old dream shattered at the scene where Gulu thrust his sword through my mother's heart. Then the vision shifted to Wei Qingyu piercing my chest. Memories from my past life came flooding back in a twisted torrent, and I awoke in an instant. Before me stood the familiar thatched cottage, with strands of moonlight leaking through the roof, while the serene summer night echoed with distant insect chirps. I sat motionless on the bed for a long time, feeling a dull ache in my chest, as if still recovering from the dream. After what felt like an eternity, I draped on my clothes and stepped outside, where half the starry river had faded and dawn was just breaking. I silently approached Gulu's side, watching the slumbering youth. I reached out to check his breath, feeling the faint warmth on my fingertips, repeating the motion mechanically over and over before finally withdrawing my hand. I walked to my mother's door again, peered through the narrow window at the people inside, stood there motionless for a while, then turned and left. Just a day ago, a group of beggars by the roadside saw a bully harassing a decent woman. They indignantly called for Gulu to join them in stopping it, but as soon as Gulu stepped forward, the beggars behind him scattered in all directions. Heaven, I knew it. He must have been awake earlier. Someone as vigilant as Gulu since childhood. How could he not notice someone approaching while he slept? I replied perfunctorily, nothing much, just couldn't sleep. Gulu's clear, profound eyes seemed capable of seeing through everything as he murmured, but you clearly look so sad. Do I look that sad? I instinctively wiped my face. No tear stains, not even crying, my expression rather blank. I couldn't understand how Gulu always managed to spot my despondency at a glance. Seeing my silence, he didn't press further but simply took me to the hills behind the house, saying since we're already awake, we might as well wait to watch the sunrise in the east. The fish belly white at the horizon was dyed into orange-red dawn, the moment the sun emerged between the mountains and white clouds. Everything radiated brilliance, and ordinary hearts expanded with the view. He was trying every possible way to keep me from feeling sad. The first part end.